This is the August 1st meeting of the planning board. Get right into our business. We have to review and approve the minutes from June 1st and June 10th. Anybody have any questions or comments on the minutes?
No question, Chair.
No question? No.
So then could I have a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve the minutes of June 1st and June 10th.
Second.
Second? Okay. Any further discussion? Nope. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I just want to comment that I didn't go to the June 10th meeting.
Okay. Emily, you said we don't have any bills? Okay, so we can skip that. Item 4 is board member comments. Any board members have any comments they would like to make?
No comment, Chair.
No? Okay. Item 5, staff reports. Mr. McGorrick, do you have anything?
Nothing this evening.
Okay. Then we're on to meetings and hearings. So, by the way, welcome, Mr. Meadows.
I was going to do that. I was going to,
Sorry,
for my comments.
I forgot. I'm racing ahead. I'm 2 hearings ahead of where we are right now in my head. Sorry. Okay. Our next order of business is continued public hearing for a proposed duplex, site plan approval and special permit, B&M Affordable Construction at 422 South Quinsigamon Avenue. Decision deadline 90 days from the close of hearing. So, where are we with this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the remaining items on this, we requested for floor area ratio calculations as well as architecturals for the design. Those have been provided and were included in the meeting materials for this evening. We also have a draft decision for the board this evening related to that. In terms of the floor area calculation, just a brief note, we did include a condition that the attic space will be reduced in order to accommodate the 0.30 FAR ratio, and that will be administratively approved by the planning department.
Okay, so, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, sir.
Board members have any questions, comments?
No question,
No.
Chair.
No? Okay, so we can close the hearing.
Correct.
Okay, so could I have a motion to close the hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the hearing.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't here.
Okay, so, do you want to review the decision now, or do you want to wait?
Pleasure of the board for that.
Okay. What do we have for conditions on?
Yeah, so the decision's fairly straightforward. It's pretty much our standard duplex condition. We do have a couple of conditions that reiterate Concom approvals in relation to the landscaping and turf grass being replaced with native species. And then the condition that we proposed in terms of the floor area ratio is that it's the attic space that is pushing that slightly over. So they'll, final plans will be reduced in attic space to accommodate that, and administratively approved by planning department that it meets that ratio.
Okay. The main reason the special permit on this is because we changed the bylaw after some monstrosities got built in an older neighborhood.
Correct.
Okay, so, anybody have any questions, comments on the decision?
Nope.
No question.
Okay, there being none, we have a motion to, well, I can have a motion, whatever, to approve or not.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and one abstention?
No abstention.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next order of business is a proposed gas station site plan approval. This is on the corner of Lake Street and Route 20. The applicant is Lake 20 LLC. The clerk is at 190, officially it's 193 Boston Turnpike. Clerk Who's going to read the legal notice?
The Shrewsbury Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Thursday evening, August 1st, 2024, at 7 p.m. in the Select Board's hearing room at the Richard D. Carney Municipal Office Building, 100 Maple Ave, to hear the application of Yatco Energy, 313 Boston Post Road, Marlborough, Mass. 01752, for site plan approval by the Planning Board as required by the Town of Shrewsbury zoning bylaw, Section 7F3, to construct a 7,015 square foot retail building housing a gasoline service station, convenience store with drive-through window, and a 4,825 square foot car wash as shown on plans entitled Site Plan Site for Proposed Development, dated June 21st, 2024, prepared by Civil Design Group LLC, 21 High Street, Suite 207, North Andover, Mass. 01845, stamped by Philip R. Henry, P.E., consisting of 22 pages. The subject project is located at 193 Hartford Turnpike, easterly of Lake Street and northerly of Hartford Turnpike, and consists in whole or in part of Shrewsbury Assessor's Tax Plate 52, Plot 125000. A copy of the application, plans, and reports may be seen in the Office of Planning and Economic Development Department at the Richard D. Carney Municipal Office Building, 100 Maple Ave, Shrewsbury, Mass., and on the Planning Board website.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Good evening. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yes. For the record, my name is Donald O'Neill. I'm a lawyer in Worcester here this evening on behalf of Yatco Energy. Also with me is Philip Henry from the Civil Design Group and Robert Mushad from the MDM Transportation Consultants. If I could start with just a brief overview of what we're proposing. Some of it was obviously read in the ad, but we are seeking site plan approval for a gasoline service station with related uses at the property at 193 Hartford Turnpike. This is roughly a 4-acre lot, and it's on the corner of Lake Street and Hartford Turnpike. There are 2 existing stone masonry block buildings on the site that we would obviously propose to demolish, and we're seeking to replace them with one main building, which is about 7,000 square feet, which would be the service station with a convenience store, including a drive-through window for coffee pickup, and also a quick service restaurant that would operate within the convenience store proper, yet to be determined as to who that might be. But it would be served by the same entry, not a separate building of any kind. That part of the property is serviced by a parking lot for 45 spaces. In addition to that, we're proposing a car wash building of roughly 4,800 square feet. That has 13 vacuum spaces and an additional 6 parking spaces. In addition to that, the proposal would require, in addition to planning board approval, zoning board approval for the use. It's a limited industrial zone in the overlay district, but it does require a special permit from the zoning board. We have also sought from them some setback relief for the 2 freestanding signs that are shown on the property, with a roughly 15, I believe they're 15 feet back from Hartford Turnpike, so we need about 10 feet of relief for that location. In terms of the presentation, we have felt that the traffic was perhaps the biggest issue, I think, since that sort of drives the design in terms of how it's laid out. So I'd like to turn it over to Robert Mishad, basically to address the traffic situation, and from that we flow into the design that we're proposing.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I think I've got to be let into the meeting so that I can do a share screen.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, Chair and board members. For the record, Robert Michaud, Managing Principal of MDM Transportation Consultants. We're based in Marlborough, Massachusetts. I'm going to very quickly review transportation aspects of this. Some of the elements that I'll be presenting will tee up Phil to talk a little more in detail about the site itself. I think the board is aware of where the site is at the intersection of Lake Street and Route 20. This is opposite the Edgemere development on Route 20 and involves a number of different study locations. Of course, the signal at Lake and Route 20 and each of the driveways along its frontage. The site is very much an industrial site today. It's oriented to the aggregate facility just to the north, bus terminal to the west, and Edgemere to the south. This section of Route 20, as the board is aware, has been recently updated to include a lot of new infrastructure, which anticipated this type of a development over time to occur. The site itself, which Phil will go into in a little more detail, comprises two buildings, one of which is the car wash. That's this long building, which is adjacent to Lake Street in the southwest corner of the site. The second building
not
is
shown.
the...
I don't think they're seeing it, but
Oh. Okay, for some reason, okay,
maybe break out a presentation.
I did. Sorry, my screen is showing something different. Try that again. Not sure that the computer is communicating correctly with the screen. So while that is on the screen, you'll see in the left side of the site, southwest corner, the long elongated building, that's the car wash facility. You'll see central to the site, another building that will comprise a quick service restaurant and then another small retail outlet with drive-through, as well as the convenience store component. In the front of that store, there are a total of 6 pump positions, 12 fueling positions total. And just to the left of that central building is another pump position for diesel fuel. In terms of access, we've reached out to DOT and collaborated with them so that we could early understand any particular concerns they might have as to access. What we're proposing to do is incorporate a central limited access driveway that would allow folks traveling eastbound, or rather westbound toward Worcester, to be able to easily get into the site. Left turns will be allowed from that central driveway to return to the east, as well as the right turn, of course, to continue to Worcester Way. Left turns will not be allowed into that driveway. Any left turn coming from Worcester Way, traveling east, will have to use a second driveway, which is shown in the far right portion of this plan, which shows an enter-only driveway. The principal purpose of that driveway is to allow direct access to the diesel fuel positions, or alternatively to access the site if you're there for a retail function, either to get regular gasoline, to use the drive-through facility at the retail convenience building, or the convenience item in that particular building. We also propose a driveway on Lake Street. See on the far left side of that drawing. That will be a full access driveway, but because of the orientation and design of the Route 20 access, there'll be limited use of that driveway based on what we've analyzed. The principal access to and from this property will be that central driveway on Route 20. It's located in a manner that is proximate to the signal but is not influenced by the vehicle queuing at the signal. And that's something that we reviewed specifically with DOT. These improvements will also include a sidewalk along the site frontage as part of a complete streets package, consistent with what was done for Edgemere across the street. Will be subject to Mass DOT access permitting. So we've got a ways to go beyond local approvals. We still need to secure that access approval from DOT. Now, in terms of traffic impact, we've conducted a full traffic impact and access study to a state-level standard. The project will also be undergoing a MEPA level review because of its adjacency to Route 20. That study quantifies how much traffic we believe will be generated relative to what's currently on the street and what we expect will exist 7 years from now, including many area background growth projects. There are approximately 9 area projects that were incorporated into this analysis. Because I'll have to reshare this, I apologize, but
You want me to try to drive the?
yeah, could you, Christopher? I don't know why it's not. So while Christopher's loading that up, we've applied industry standard trip generation rates to understand how much traffic this would generate in the aggregate. So the next slide actually provides a summary table of what that looks like. It's broken into the total number of trips, which is on average, depending on the peak hour that we're looking at, about 200 directional trips, either coming into or leaving the property. Slightly high in the morning, slightly less in the evening. Most of those trips are what are known as pass-by trips. These facilities, gas convenience, car wash, quick service restaurant, are facilities of convenience that draw most of their business from the existing passing traffic stream. It's a well-established fact, especially on Route 20, which is a high-volume principal arterial road. You'll see the second or middle column indicates what proportion of those total trips are actually not new. They're simply being diverted to and then leaving the site from the existing stream. So the net new traffic from this combination of uses is approximately 40 to 60 peak directional trips, either coming in or going out per hour, depending on the peak hour. The next slide, Christopher, indicates in a very schematic way what those new trips look like during a snapshot in time. This is a weekday morning peak hour. You'll see that Lake Street on the far left of the diagram with the signal, the colored signal dot. You've got Route 20 east and west. 15 vehicle trip increases expected along Lake Street, very modest number. About 50 to or from the Worcester direction west, and from the east about 34 vehicle trips. So they're very modest new trips. In fact, have been incorporated by default as part of the planning process that was applied to develop the infrastructure at this frontage. The next slide, Christopher, shows the equivalent weekday evening peak hour. They're actually lower numbers. And the next slide would show the equivalent Saturday midday. Again, fairly modest numbers. The next slide would present the overview of operationally how this site is expected to function once it's built. These are a lot of letters, numbers. They represent a letter grade designation called level of service for various points in time. The first column for each red dot position would represent what's happening today, or actually the first row, I should say, of each of those dots, the existing operational analysis. The second column represents what we expect would happen independent of the project with 7 years of growth. And the last row would represent what we anticipate the operations to be once this project is in place. And you'll see a lot of A's, B's, and C's, and occasional D. What this really says is that there's ample capacity to accommodate this use well within prescribed acceptable levels. Level of service D is considered an acceptable operating standard. in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You'll also see that there's not a whole lot of change between what we call no build and build, right? Those modest number of trips that I just presented, which really represent between one vehicle every 2 minutes or as much as one vehicle a minute, really aren't changing the dial on what this analysis is saying. So there is ample capacity, and it's not a surprise given the recent reconstruction of that portion of Route 20. Now, the next slide, as we begin to look at the site and its functions, and then this will lead into what Phil will present, we did do a queuing analysis, an assessment of how the car wash would function. We've got a lot of data, real data for car wash facilities. We do a lot of these days. This is a single tunnel facility that has an operating capacity of about 120 vehicles per hour. So it has a high capacity to move vehicles through. It has the ability, based on its stacking lanes, to accommodate as many as 30 to 40 vehicles with absolutely no influence on on-site circulation or access. The typical queuing conditions, which are presented in more detail in the traffic report, are going to be substantially less than what's actually shown in the diagram here. So we're very satisfied that there's ample on-site queuing capacity for that to function well without influencing Route 20, the signal, on-site circulation. The next slide presents a circulation assessment for the largest potential vehicle accessing and circulating within the property. I mentioned earlier that that more easterly driveway, which is an enter-only driveway, is specifically designed to accommodate a WB67 or a fuel tanker vehicle, both into and behind the site, the fueling position, and then leaving the site as a left turn to continue east if they need to go there. So there's plenty of on-site capacity or circulation area. There's plenty of room at the driveway to facilitate an appropriate deceleration into the site and eventually to the stop position. The next slide presents similar information for a different vehicle type. So if you could advance one, Christopher. This is someone coming from the, yes, thank you. This is someone coming eastbound, wants to turn left into the property. They get into an exclusive left turn lane. That left turn lane is there today. It will be slightly extended to allow for a better deceleration into this driveway, one of the comments that DOT had for us. And its swept path also works quite well. You'll see that when departing the site, making a right turn to go westbound toward Worcester, you'll see that the driveway design is specifically accommodating that larger sweep. And the design will include striping and other elements that restrict how that works for smaller vehicles, but that does allow for that larger sweep of a vehicle so that they can turn entirely into that rightmost through lane at the signal. The next slide, Christopher, would present yet another version of swept path. This is for a fire truck. This is Shrewsbury's tower vehicle. We assumed in this case, the worst case scenario where they need to come in from Lake Street, the driveway at Lake Street, and all of the circulation elements within the property, again, are sufficient to accommodate all of those sweeps. And then finally, I think the last slide we have reflects a different path, if you will, by that same emergency vehicle, that tower vehicle. So from a circulation standpoint, this is well designed. It has very modest impact. It will be subject to DOT review and approval through access permitting, and it is subject to MEPA, so there'll be other eyes on this as well, not only a Mass DOT, but others. So with that, I'm going to ask that Christopher, if you could open up the site plan set, which Phil will present. I'll hand it over to Phil.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Phil Henry with Civil Design Group. We're the civil engineers on the project. Christopher, what I'll ask you to do is, since Bob gave a overview and locus of the project, what I'll do is, I think it'll be most efficient if I give a zoomed-in presentation. So let's start on sheet 7, the site plan. What I'll do is I'll go through the site plan, grading, and utility plan. And what you're going to be looking at is the westerly half of the site and then the easterly half of the site, and then vice versa. As Don had indicated, this site is zoned limited industrial, and it's also zoned Route 20 overlay. We chose to comply to the underlying zone, the LI, or limited industrial district. So we think this site complies in terms of its building setbacks, landscape setbacks, requirements for stalls and the like. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly go through and I'll touch on some site elements on each of the site grading and utility plans. So just working from left to right, you'll see the site access off of Lake Street, which is proposed to be a full access curb cut. From there, you would enter the site and you would immediately see the wash structure, which you would enter in from the easterly. So folks coming in on Lake Street could make an immediate right turn and get into the Q lane, or go straight, and then you'll see the 13. Could you zoom in just a little bit, Christopher? Yeah. Folks entering on Lake Street, proceeding straight, will encounter about 13 vacuum spaces, just north of the structure. So folks could either vacuum their cars before or after. Folks that eventually make it through the queue line will enter the car wash via on the north side, making a left-hand turn into the structure. For some reason, if those folks need to exit the car wash before entering the car wash, there's a sort of an emergency exit, if you will, as they proceed straight, as opposed to turning left into the car wash. From there, folks can go left or right. Folks that go right would be entering into the easterly half of the site, if you will, where the market and the quick serve restaurant will be, and they'll be looking at the 6 dispensers, regular dispensers. I'll call them low-speed dispensers. On the left-hand side or north, as they're approaching, they would be looking at the high-speed diesel dispensers, and then that convenience store. Perhaps you can go to slide 8, Christopher. Yeah, so now we're looking at the easterly half. You'll see the full view of the 6, I'll call it low-speed fueling dispensers, 12 fueling positions. The market is set back behind the dispensers and just to the right of the high-speed fueling dispensers. Behind the high-speed fueling dispensers is the underground storage tanks and 10 employee parking spaces, and just behind that is the trash receptacle, which will be enclosed in a vinyl fence or some sort of enclosure. This market is supported with 45 spaces that are located right in front of the building and forward of the 6 fueling dispensers, and is accessed via that restricted, we'll call it central curb cut, that allows right in, right out, left ins, but no left ins, just a left out. As we move to the easterly side of the site, there's the in-only curb cut, and then from entering either entrance on Route 20, folks can get into the drive-through lane. There's a drive-through entrance just to the right of the structure. On this plan, there is proposed to be 29 site lights that are 25 feet tall, including building wall packs. There's ADA parking spaces located proximate to the front doors of the structures. There's directional signage, there's snow storage. And overall, this site will have a decrease of just over 1 acre of impervious, or an increase of about 1 acre of landscaping throughout the site. Sheet 9, Christopher. Looking back at the westerly half of the site, this is fairly involved sheet, so there's lines and going everywhere. Basically, we're showing the contours. Mainly, the reason I wanted to show this sheet was basically to show that all the drainage is collected in 12 catch basin inlets and then is piped to the easterly half of the site. Christopher, you can go to sheet 10. I'm happy to come back to this sheet if any folks have any specific inquiries, but essentially you'll see on there's a subsurface infiltration system that is just forward of the dispensers. Yep, right there. Most of the or all of the asphalt on site will be piped into that infiltration system first, and then there's actually an overflow pipe or two overflow pipes that drain into an above ground basin just east of that or right as you're looking at the plan. Basically, that system will act as one in higher storms or in less frequent storms, I should say. The more frequent storms, it's more or less that pond will probably most likely remain dry, and the water will be primarily infiltrated into that subsurface infiltration system. Shrewsbury has a local regulation that requires static capture of the 1 inch times the impervious coverage of the site. That subsurface infiltration system achieves that. So higher storms will overflow via the two 24-inch drain pipes that discharge into that overflow, into the above-ground basin. We've had discussions with DOT. This is not only a site low point, but it's also, I'll call it a regional low point. Along Route 20, this is the low point. So we think it's important to have a drainage connection. DOT's initial feedback says that they do not want a drainage connection, despite the fact that there is currently a drainage connection to the Route 20 driveway, Route 20 drainage system. So basically how this system is designed is this system can hold and accommodate up to and including the 100-year storm. The 100-year storm does overflow into an on-site catch basin that eventually does go into the state drainage system, which historically they do allow overflow systems. However, as belt and suspenders, this infiltration, the above-ground infiltration system, should water get into that, which it will, and not infiltrate due to lack of maintenance or for whatever reason, there is a drain at the foot of that basin with a valve that can be opened to allow that runoff to drain. Should it require maintenance. Sheet 11 basically is the utility plan. Yep, sheet 11 is the utility plan. This plan looks very familiar to an application that was on this site that was probably before you guys a few years ago. Basically, the connection points for water, gas, and electric are the same, which come off of Lake Street, and they traverse west to east throughout the site and then service the buildings. And then the sewer connection is through an on-site capped sewer service in Route 20 right at the central driveway. So that will look familiar for those of you that are familiar with the project that was before you a few years ago. And that's about it. Lastly, landscaping. We're proposing, I think, 15 new trees. We're concentrating the landscaping along the street frontage, over 200 shrubs and 150 ground cover. So that's the high level, but I'm happy to get into any more specifics. Thank you.
Questions?
Have you estimated the required water need for the car wash?
Yeah, so we're estimating about 7,000 gallons per day. Comparatively, the market's going to use next to nothing compared to that. So we're proposing 7,000. The details of that have not been completely worked out yet. So there may be some of that's reclaimed, but we haven't worked out those details yet.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of the access, that central in and out, when you're coming out onto Route 20 from the central access way, can the trucks take a left turn heading onto Route 20 East, or is it only right turn?
The, whether it's a passenger vehicle or a larger truck, they will both be allowed to make that left turn to head east. And that's an important factor for this particular site. There's really no other good option to get back east. The benefit of the site and the way that the driveway is laid out is that it takes advantage of the gaps that are actually being created by the signal. And even under the long-term growth scenario, the analysis shows that the vehicle cues from that signal don't ever reach that driveway. Volumetrically, that left turn movement is going to be highest in the morning because of the nature of, say, getting a coffee in the morning on the way to, part of a commute, or gas for that matter, or a convenience item. That volume is estimated to be about around 100 vehicles per hour. And really what that means is that if you're standing at the corner of the driveway, you're going to see somewhere between 1 and 2 vehicles over the course of a typical minute. It's well below the capacity of the driveway to accommodate that volume. It's clearly visible from each direction on Route 20, so there's no sightline issue. And the capacity analysis, which we need to show DOT will function well, functions well. It's below capacity. Other hours of the day, in the evening, for instance, certain uses are not generating as much activity. That volume is about 50 vehicles per hour. It's about 1 vehicle a minute. And on a Saturday, that same left turn is about 50 per hour at the highest hours. So there'd be many hours of the day beyond the morning commute where that volume is somewhere at 50 or less per hour. So it's not a really high volume driveway necessarily, but it's an important driveway to allow that eastbound traffic to continue.
I know you have to go through MEPA process, and I'm sure you need to get some permits from Mass DOT. I'm sure they'll take a closer look at it, but at least conceptually, it seems to me that you may have gotten some blessing of this concept from Mass DOT.
Yeah, they certainly will still have a more thorough technical review of it, but as we do with any project, we consult early on because we don't like surprises.
Yeah.
We want to make sure it functions well and that we've considered any possible concern that DOT might have. And we believe that this current design, really the only thing that changed on this relative to our initial concept was that we took the easterly driveway, the enter-only driveway, and we pushed it all the way to the end of the property. And what that allows is a more gentle deceleration in that existing left turn lane, which currently serves the industrial use next door to us anyway. So we've got plenty of deceleration area, plenty of storage, and the capacity shows that it all works. So we don't expect any surprises, and we think, although DOT hasn't formally blessed this, that's subject to a permit, that it's well positioned.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes, Steve?
So Bob, you're saying like 1 or 2 vehicles per minute during peak hours you anticipate would take that left onto Route 20 East from the main access road?
That's correct.
And where does that main access road line up with the kind of market basket breakaway
Yeah.
that, in my opinion, works when you're turning onto the market basket site heading west? Right before, the entrance is right by the Clinton Savings Bank.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's off the map, so to speak. So there's really they're not even close to one another. The enter-only driveway, if you focus on the right side, if you go another several hundred feet to the right of that, is that area that you're talking about. So none of this access is going to be influenced by or to that driveway for Edgemere.
Okay. And what do you anticipate people exiting the site off of? Number one, what is the distance from the intersection of Lake Street and 20 and your entrance and egress, Lake Street entrance and egress.
Oh, on Lake Street?
Yeah,
Yeah, Phil can probably give you an estimate of what that is.
I couldn't, the detail on the plan was not great.
Yeah, it's as
Oh, yeah.
far north, I can tell you, it's as far north as it can possibly go.
Correct.
You know, one of the, we very carefully considered that, right? You've got the bus terminal driveway, which is very close by there. You know, it certainly, I think it's within a couple of 100 feet of where the signal is. One of the features of the design, and it may be shown on the prior sheet, Christopher, is this box, you'll see this striped box, shaded box. The intention of that box is do not block the box marking. It's really intended to facilitate movements, you know, out of the driveway if necessary. But as a practical matter, that driveway is expected to generate about 20 or so left turns an hour. It's a relatively low volume driveway.
During peak?
During peak, yeah. You know, if you think about this, you know, folks who may be inclined to go here wouldn't necessarily make it a dedicated trip during a peak hour. I started off by saying that the nature of the uses are that they draw principally from the existing traffic stream. So if I'm on an eastbound commute in the morning and I need gas and I'm coming down Lake Street, I'm already on Lake Street, I may be inclined to make a left turn into here to get into the site, but then I'd probably be inclined to make a left turn onto Route 20 directly from the central driveway to continue my commute. And vice versa, if I'm coming from Worcester Way east, I'm not going on a Lake Street, I'm turning directly into the site. So that driveway is important because it provides a local connection for anyone who wants to get there more directly from the local neighborhood system, for instance. But it's not driving a high volume, and it's certainly not driving a lot of new volume.
I would estimate that driveway to the crosswalk about 140 feet.
Okay. Because, you know, my only comment was if you don't get the leftbound, the left turn eastbound on the Route 20, what does that do to the Lake Street intersection?
Yeah,
That's-
the exit movement,
Yeah.
you mean, the left turn exit? Yeah,
But that's not our call, that's MassDOT.
yeah, I mean, ideally, you know, MassDOT approved a certain infrastructure design along Route 20. Ordinarily, a design like that would accommodate the potential for, say, barrier dividing the highway at some future date. That was never a consideration. There's no jug handle or ability to make a sweeping left turn from that left turn lane at the signal, right? It wasn't designed that way. I wish it had been, but it wasn't. So I don't think there was any contemplation long-term that there would be access restrictions necessarily along Route 20. Otherwise, that infrastructure would have been designed a little bit different than it actually did. And the volumes that we're talking about right here are not rising to the level of a red flag, in my opinion. If this was a generator of new and substantial traffic, most of which was oriented to or from the east, I would think differently. But the nature of the use as pass-by oriented, the fact that, you know, it's a facility of convenience. If folks are having difficulty getting into or out of here, they'll go to the next place down the road. You know, that's just,
Which is a lot more difficult to get in and out.
yeah. Agreed. So they'll end up in Northborough. But yeah,
That makes it
so
fun.
yeah, we've got to.
Anyone else questions right now? No. I have a few. So 140 feet is not very far.
It's 7 car lengths.
Yeah, but when you're coming around a corner, coming off what's the speed limit there? Cars going about 45 and slowing down at the corner?
Yeah, well, certainly as vehicles are approaching Route 20, they're slowing down substantially, even if it's a green light.
I'm sorry, I meant going westbound and then turning onto Lake Street, taking a right onto Lake Street.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, right turn. Average speed on a turn is between, I don't know, 15 to 18 miles an hour. You know, some folks might go a little bit faster than that, but it's hard to go faster than that on a right turn.
So is a clear line of sight, like in that triangle, is that there from like, when you start to make the turn off of Route 20 onto Lake Street, is that all gonna be like low landscaping, whatever, so you can see across?
Right, it will have to be, right, so the sightline triangle is what you're referring to.
Right.
So if you're at a stopped position at the driveway, looking left toward Route 20 to see if there's a gap, right, you'll easily see anyone coming from the Route 20 corridor. The sightline distance from that driveway extends well beyond just where the signal is. You'll actually be able to see well beyond the signal, probably for a distance of at least, 2 to 250 feet, where vehicles are going at slower speeds than normal travel speeds in 20 because they're making the turn. The sight line to a right turn from the westbound through lane, making a right turn on a Lake Street, all of the landscaping and features in that area will be designed so that the mature growth height is no more than 2.5 feet. Right, so you'll have clear visibility to that corner.
Somebody, evening peak, coming out of the gas station on that opening right onto Route 20 that we can see right now. At evening peak, they're not gonna have trouble getting out of that and crossing 2 lanes of traffic?
At 50 vehicles per hour, that's the volume that would be doing that. There are more than sufficient gaps. And I understand the volumes on Route 20 are high volumes, all right? That's what's modeled and what we've provided that will be subject to DOT review. And it functions at a level of service D or better, right? What that means is that it doesn't mean you won't have any delay. It means you'll have to be selective about making that movement, but you shouldn't wait any more than about 30 to 35 seconds to be able to do that. The queuing conditions under that scenario are
Yep.
going to be 1 to 2 vehicles on the site. It's not a heavy enough movement, and there are sufficient gaps to accommodate it.
The question might have been answered, but I'm not sure. Tanker comes out, takes a right, going towards Worcester. They're not gonna be expected to make a U-turn at that intersection,
No,
right?
they can't.
But, I know, but that doesn't mean they won't try.
Yeah, well, if they try it, they won't do it again. But that said, the intention of that driveway is specifically for that purpose. I believe strongly that Route 20 is a very heavily commercially oriented corridor. There's a lot of truck activity there, as you know. This facility is going to cater to that existing volume, that existing, and folks who use this facility are going to probably do so on a regular basis. This is not a facility that you're going to find on your GPS and travel 10 miles to get to. This is something that, again, a facility of convenience. There aren't a whole lot of these high-speed diesel fueling facilities along Route 20. This will be easy to get to, easy to circulate within, and easy to leave.
So the high-speed diesel for trucks
For trucks.
specifically?
Yes.
Large trucks?
Large, the articulated trucks that have, 60-gallon tanks, I think it is. They're very specific pumps that pump fuel at a very high rate of speed because of the size of the tanks they need to fill.
Can you point out to me again where those are? Oh, okay, all right, that makes sense. I have one other question. So you got the system to collect the water. Is it all gonna, it's all gonna be groundwater recharged? It's not gonna, none of it's going out into storm drains?
So this site today has runoff from the site into the drainage system, into Route 20, and also into the property behind it. we are charged with mitigating that runoff. So what we do is we prepare watershed maps. So basically, the watershed for this site is, folks, points north receive runoff from this site today, and then everything else goes to Route 20. We wanted to mitigate, we wanted to basically bring down the peak flow rate to the northerly neighborhood almost down to zero. And then bring everything up front to Route 20, mitigate what's going to Route 20, but then meter it out via a drainage connection. DOT would not allow that initially. So basically, this system is designed to infiltrate everything up to and including the 100-year storm. However, I will say the 100-year storm does peak over an on-site catch basin that's in the above-ground system that then discharges or is connected to the state system. And as belt and suspenders, because things clog over time, we as I mentioned, we have basically like a drain that is closed by a valve that should water need to be drained out, it can be, as opposed to pumping it out.
Yep. One last question, I promise. I didn't hear anything about gas separators or anything to catch, way of petroleum products that inevitably probably going to end up on the ground, maybe only a little bit at a time, but.
Yes, so the dispensers, you'll see the grooves around the concrete, PLBs, positive limiting, they basically, let me see if I can.
Right, I know what you're talking about, but when it rains, some of that's going to get.
Yeah, so they'll go into the catch basins,
Right.
which will be a deep sump, and then all those sumps will be hooded as well.
Okay.
So oils will float.
So the catch basins are going to trap it all. Should.
That's the first line of defense.
Okay. I'm good, thank you. Mr. McGoldrick?
No, so we are still waiting for peer review comment on this project, as well as we'll probably have some staff comments that we're still collecting from the various departments, but we'll wait to provide those formal comments.
Do we have a separate traffic peer review? Did we have a separate traffic peer review?
Yeah, I believe, traffic and site plan so far.
And you've started your MIPA process?
We're filing this
Yes.
month.
Filing, okay,
This is a public hearing, right?
yes.
Okay. So this is a public hearing. Would anybody in the audience like to be heard on this? Nope. Then could I have a motion to continue the hearing until our next meeting on
September 5th?
September 5th, yep.
the 5th?
I'll make a motion to continue this hearing until the September 5th meeting.
Second.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank
See
you.
next
Thank you.
month. Thank you.
See you next month. I will see you next month. I'll see you next month.
Okay. Okay, so my, when I made my thing for old people's site, so next thing is 160 Olden Street, right? 'Cause
Yep,
I'm on a different page. as we-
yep.
Okay, so next order of business is post warehouse facilities, site plan approval and special permit for 160 Holden Street LLC, continued public hearing, location at 142 Clinton Street, and decision deadline is 90 days from the close of the hearing, so, good evening.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Mrs. Donahue, do you have any open remarks you want to make, or?
Just briefly to bring the recollection of the board current, at the close of the last public hearing, in which this meeting was continued to this evening, we specifically asked any board members if they had any particular comments or questions with regard to the project. And the responses, as I recall it, was a request for staff to investigate certain agreements with the city of Worcester. But as to the project, there were no open questions. So we are here this evening, obviously glad to answer any questions if they have arisen, but we have not prepared any materials or presentation to the board because of that.
Okay. Mr. McGoldrick, do you have anything you want to present to the board?
I do, thank you. So a memo was provided at the front of the table and at the board members' places this evening. The purpose of this memorandum is to consolidate topics and information discussed throughout the planning board's public hearing process, regardless of their relevance to the decision. The memo in no way replaces the extensive studies, reports, and peer review conducted throughout the process, but instead provides consolidated information in a more easily digestible format as a supplement to the extensive record that's been produced. In addition to this memo, the board requested more detailed information regarding access to emergency water via the city of Worcester. Provided the board this evening with an April 30th, 1970s agreement, as well as the Chapter 246 of the Acts of 1923, which authorized the town of Shrewsbury access to Worcester water. The infrastructure has been in place and maintained for over a century, and it was utilized as recently as June 2023 in response to a pump station failure. The town stores water sufficient for approximately 24 hours under normal usage conditions. The process to connect to the Worcester water resources for our system takes approximately 2 hours to complete and can be done 24/7, 365 days a year, should the need arise. An additional temporary connection can be made with Worcester at a separate location by linking fire hydrants together. I think it's important to note that the proposed project includes providing a new sewer main along Holden Street that will allow for a number of residential homes to connect to public sewer, thereby improving local source protection of the aquifer. A draft decision has also been provided for the board's consideration this evening. Proposed conditions included within that draft decision relate to many of the topics that were discussed. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have with regard to those documents.
Okay. Questions, members of the board? Did everybody see the copy of the, I know that was an issue last meeting, copy of that 1970 agreement that is in force? So any questions or comments on that? Okay.
No question.
Excuse me. Any questions or comments from any members of the board? Anyone? No? I would just make one comment, 'cause I think it's important to be in the record. The stormwater regulations that Shrewsbury has follow the state calls them guidelines, DEP. Those follow the federal standards from EPA. So the standards that EPA puts for the entire country have filtered down to our bylaw. It reflects the same type of control. So what we have in place to protect the aquifer is what's prescribed at the federal level, and every state in the country has to follow it. So we do have that, and the other thing is we are one of the relatively few communities that were early adopters of a bylaw to protect the aquifer. So based on everything that I heard and what I saw, I'm comfortable that we've got the protections that we need. Having said that, anyone else?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to close this public hearing.
Okay. We have a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Second?
Does the
Okay.
public not get to speak before you close the public hearing?
Nope.
This is still a public hearing.
Okay, one at a time. Let me explain the way public hearings work. Public hearings are to get comments from the public. We've had over, I think, 8 hours of public comment, not just public hearing. The board is not required to continue to have public input after the board thinks that it has enough information for it to make a decision. And the board apparently, excuse me, please, I'm trying to explain to you what it is. The board can, at its discretion, close a public hearing anytime that it wants. And after this amount of time and the information that we have, right now we have a motion and a second, and the board will discuss whether or not they want to close the hearing. If the board votes to close the hearing, it's closed. If the board votes not to close the hearing, then we're going to have to discuss and decide what we want to do. But I do think, and you may not agree, but I do think that there's been plenty of opportunity for public comment. We've gone now for 8 months on this, and the board, I think, I mean, you could speak for yourselves. I have enough information to be able to make a decision. I don't need to take any more public comment because I think we've heard your concerns, at least I've heard your concerns. We are trying to address what we can within the confines of the law that allow us to control the situation. We can't do everything that everybody wants. I told you that beginning of the hearing. We wish we had the power that everybody thinks we have, but we don't. So I think we're making our best effort to do what we can to address the issues that were raised within the confines of the law. So having said that, right now we have a motion, I think we have a second. Does anybody else on the board have any questions or comments?
No question, Chair.
Okay,
Questions?
then I will ask the board to vote. So all of those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye.
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 Now, do we need to do that on both? Are the site plan in, or do we just,
I believe the motion was to close both the public hearing on the site plan and the special permit.
is that what you said? Okay, good. Okay, so, then we'd move on, if we want to tonight, to deliberation. What does the board want to do
What do you,
on decision? Talk about a decision. What, does the board want to discuss the draft that Mr. McGolrick had put together?
Yeah.
Yes?
I think it's,
Did the vote to close the public hearing just pass? I only heard one.
Yes.
I only heard one aye.
It's unanimous.
I heard all of them.
How disappointing. What was the vote?
Okay, excuse me, please. You know, I think that everybody over the course of these 8 or 9 months has been,
you're talking about tonight.
okay, we're talking about tonight, but I think we've gone this far, and generally, we've had a pretty civil interaction, and this thing has to end at some point. And we think that we have enough information, and that brings us to where we are now. You might not agree, but I think the board thinks they have enough information. If in discussion somebody wants more information, we'll have to deal with it, but I'm sorry, but that,
This just introduced new information that we weren't privy to, that you had to take them up to find regarding the agreements with Worcester, and we came and asked questions about it. My understanding of those agreements is very, for people in Worcester, is that it's very different regarding the water supply. It's
Okay,
totally at their discretion.
okay, we're not taking public comment.
You closed the public hearing.
It's closed. And the only thing I will tell you is the document is here, that you can have a copy of it.
Mr. Chairman, you
What?
closed the public hearing.
The hearing's closed. So, I'm sorry, but it's closed. I'm trying to explain to you how it works, but I guess we're not doing well. Are we good?
Mr. Chairman, now you have 90 days to make a decision and
Right.
file that decision in the town clerk's office.
Right,
And from the date you make the decision, you have 14 days to file it.
right,
So, but you have to file it within that 90-day window.
okay.
So you can deliberate this evening, or you can deliberate at your next meeting, but you can't deliberate outside of a public meeting.
Right, so, do we want to, do you want to discuss this? Does anybody have any questions on this? Do you want to go over the conditions that, you don't have to go over the general conditions?
Excuse me, if you're going to speak
me.
in this meeting, then I think you'd need to take it outside, because this is a public meeting that we're having here right now.
We should take it outside.
You can't speak without, thank you.
As you said, you are all liable for that. This board has a responsibility to the residents that it has failed tonight.
Okay, Mr. McGoldrick.
Thank you. Let me just pull up the decision.
Absolute disgrace.
Things that were specific to this. We have general conditions, but,
Yeah, so there's a number of conditions that are provided within the decision.
About the neighborhood.
So there's a number of conditions that are provided within the decision. We have split them via both the standard conditions, which are what are provided for pretty much every project, as we kind of discussed at the previous hearing. We also separate them into a number of what I would say is kind of check-in points throughout the process, namely prior to construction, prior to or during construction, prior to issuance of an occupancy permit, and then after the occupancy permit, any other standard conditions. So with that, the conditions for both the special permit and the site plan as drafted are identical. We've done that so that it's both documents contain the same conditions. In this case, there are specific conditions for approval in the limited industrial district. Those are outlined in the bylaw. Those have been incorporated pretty much verbatim into the decision as required by the bylaw.
okay.
So, are there specific ones that we want to?
No, I just, I know when you were working on this, you were trying to incorporate conditions that related to what we were hearing. We had heard in the public hearing.
Correct.
This isn't all standard language, so
So,
I just wanted to see if you could call out specific things.
I'd be happy to do so. So first, one of the discussion points was related to de-icing compounds. We're specifically prohibiting de-icing compounds such as calcium chloride or calcium magnesium acetate or similar to be used on site. So that's included in the snow removal conditions. All truck loading doors to remain closed when not in operation between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. The applicant has agreed to post monitoring traffic studies for a period of 5 years, and the specifics of that post monitoring are included in that condition. We also have post monitoring sound studies that will be conducted for a period of, depending upon the occupancy of the specific buildings that will be included.
And there is a provision in here for only electric flock trucks to be driven outside because of the concern of that they might be a little loud at night. So there won't be any, there's not going to be any combustion engine flock trucks. I know there was something else, I just lost my train of thought.
So one of the, so we do require the rooftop equipment to be required to meet the Mass DEP noise regulations. as well as engine jake brakes anywhere in the facility are prohibited. We do require signage for a number of these provisions. We're also requiring a transportation demand management plan related to rideshare services, as well as a transportation demand, or transportation coordinator to be provided, which will run those services for applicants. We're including provisions related to commitments that were outlined in the Good Neighbor document that the applicant shared. Many of those related to working with outside services such as WRTA to attempt to bring bus service to the site, as well as associated amenities. So the applicant is committed to continue those efforts.
There's another provision in here about screening on Flag Street that wasn't originally.
Yeah, so that was brought up. So there was there's a slope that's goes up to Flag Street that has been cleared. One of the residents that expressed concern of vegetation there. The applicant will provide a revised landscape plan, which will include vegetation to be planted along that Flag Street on the applicant's property to provide some additional vegetative buffering.
And the applicant is going to make best efforts to put a fence across Clinton Street at an appropriate place if MassDOT will allow it to happen, to try to screen light shining into the houses across the street. That's a MassDOT decision, but the applicant has agreed to do it if MassDOT will let them do it. Just a little thing, but so that the police can enforce the no truck idling law over 5 minutes. The applicant is providing some signs that the town will put in after consultation with the neighbors over by the mini market pizza place. I know there's other stuff in here that we put in specifically.
There was a provision put in there
I'm
with
sorry?
regard to if there was anything that came up from any other MIPA items, that it would be.
Right.
Yeah, so
Good point.
the
Enforced.
MIPA, the section 61 findings of the section where MIPA provides those recommendations, and those will be incorporated as if the board is adopting them.
And the applicant is obligated to make approximately $1.5 million in improvements to the intersections. And I got the name of the study you have to do over at Main Street. And
A functional design report?
I'm sorry?
The functional design report?
Yes. And you're going to do that and present it to MassDOT so they can act upon it.
Correct.
Okay, was there anything that anyone thinks Chris has omitted here?
Chris did a great job. I was thinking if there should be any reference to Concom certificate. I believe they already went through the Concom and received the certificate. Would there be any situation that they may have to come back to adapt and may need to come back to us if something there changes or something at the MIPA level changes?
So at this stage, I'm not anticipating that they would need to come back. Concom is substantially through their process. If there were a modification that's required via Concom or MIPA process, the applicant would return to this board, whether it's a de minimis change or a full modification.
So the sewer line is in here, right? It's going to be installed in Holton Street?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I forgot the other thing.
Right.
I forgot what the other thing was. I know they have to do something else, post-development. We have to do the monitoring for, what, 5 years?
For traffic, correct. And I think
Traffic.
3 years for sound.
Yep. So, as far as oversight, this this isn't completely over. It'll go on for a while to make sure that it was gotten right. So, anybody else have anything?
I'm sorry, just just a point of clarification, we actually will, on the site plan approval decision, because the applicant is requesting reserve spaces, we will, the language in the bylaws that the board authorize the use of reserve spaces, so we will require that vote as well.
Oh, and the other thing, and I know you're gonna do it, because you said you would, but as many trees along Clinton Street that can be saved, some of them are in state right away anyways, but are gonna be saved to keep as much of a screen there as possible. So, okay, it's a long journey to get here, but we're here. So, if nobody else has any comments, I'd entertain, we're gonna do this two separate votes.
Yeah, 2 separate.
To approve,
I didn't have a comment, I just had a quick question.
point of order?
I just had a quick question.
A point of order? What?
Yeah.
Okay, try it. We'll see if it's appropriate.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. This is the first I see about doing the new sewer along Holden Street.
I'm sorry, what?
The sewer that.
Oh, the sewer line?
Sewer on Holden Street.
Yeah.
That's the first I've seen of it. Is it just Holden Street, or would it, there's a small section of Sewell Street, and I don't know about Candlewood, but those are right off of the Holden Street, are those included?
This is sewer line going down Holden Street back to the pump station over by Maine, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So that does include what, the area on Sewell Street that's not completed?
No. It's being put in because they need the sewer line.
Yeah.
But also, any neighbors where it goes by, and it sounds like you're not one of them, but any,
I'm right next to Newton Pond on Sewell Street.
Yeah.
I'm Jerry McLeany, 115 Sewell Street.
on Holden,
Doesn't have sewer yet.
on any houses on Holden Street that it goes by, if they don't have it, we'll be able to hook in.
Got it. All right, thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Okay. So, do we have how do we do this?
It might, Mr. Chairman, if I could suggest, that it might be appropriate to vote whether to authorize the 128 reserve spaces, since it's incorporated in the approved plans separately.
We need to do that? We can do it.
Yeah, so I think the vote to authorize those does have to be done separately, so we'll, but I think depending upon the discretion of the board, they may be able to do the decision and that.
Does that need
This-
to be in the site plan approval, or the?
Correct,
in
it's
the-
site
okay.
plan approval, so that's just the 4-member.
On the parking. The parking's on site plan.
You can do all 3 votes separately is probably the cleanest way.
No, right, but if we did it separate, it would be done with the site plan.
Correct.
Site plan and parking,
Correct.
okay. So, what tries
Right.
again?
I'll make a motion to vote for the site plan approval for 160 Holden Street.
That is presented.
That's presented to us this evening,
Yeah, dated, does it have a date?
dated August 1st, 2024.
Okay, okay. Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any further discussion?
So
There being none?
So I just wanted to clarify that motion, so that is, the motion is to approve the site plan approval and authorize the reserve parking spaces.
I thought we had to do that separate.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry.
I thought we were
I
supposed to do that
thought we were just doing the
separately.
special permit right now. I'm
The
confused.
motion was for the site plan, and then I think they'll
And then we-
reserve parking separately.
Yeah,
I
That was
got
gonna be the
special
second one.
permit on the mind. Okay.
It's approved, and then they would consider the reserve
All right.
parking.
I see.
So this is site plan we're doing?
Yes.
All right.
The motion was site
Sorry.
plan.
Because I seem to
that's
be
all right.
lost on that. Okay. So, you made a motion
Yes.
to approve the site plan dated August 1st.
yes.
Okay, we had a second, right? Okay. I'm glad they straightened me out, so now I know it's for site plan approval. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so voted. Now you need,
Can I make a motion to approve the 126 reserved parking spaces as part of the site plan approval for 160 Holden Street? or 142 Clinton Street, excuse me.
Okay, you have a second?
Second.
Yeah, second, yes.
Okay. You can, no, this one you can't vote on.
Okay.
The site plan.
Yep.
The special permit, you gotta wait.
Yeah, I know.
I know you're anxious. Kid wants to open his present at Christmas, but you have to wait. Okay, so all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed. So that passed 4-0. Okay, now, special permit.
I will make a motion to consider the special permit for 142 Clinton Street, dated August 1st, 2024. My apologies.
We have a second? You can do that one.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay, so 5-0. So, for the moment, we are done, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just give me 1 second to. Haley, you get to go home early.
Thank you.
You might make it home before 12.
Might make it home for dinner.
Okay. You don't, it's up to you if you want to stick around. I think,
The next one, or?
If you want.
I don't think so. You know what? I thought we might have.
It's great to see you.
I thought we might have, but no, I think we're fine.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Troops dismissed.
Yeah, see ya.
Thank you, Steve.
It's okay to stay.
Thanks for your advice also through this process. Okay. Next order of business is proposed warehouse and distribution facility, site plan approval, Prologis Inc., continued public hearing, location 50 Centec Boulevard, 12 Centennial Drive, decision deadline 90 days from close of hearing. This evening, we're going to be discussing traffic, correct?
That's correct. Just to tee it up, if I might, Mr. Chairman, we did a high-level review on traffic when we had the joint meeting with the planning board. So this evening we'll focus particularly on the impacts on Shrewsbury in that action. We have the benefit of having done this on this schedule, that we did receive peer review comments from Bowman and had an opportunity to reply to those also in writing. And so, to some extent, some of the potential issues have now been delineated, and to some extent, Mr. Michaud will cover those this evening, but we certainly expect that we'll hear from Bowman subsequently and be able to come back and close out at some point that letter. So,
Okay, so we had the high level, but did we?
We'll get into details tonight.
No, I mean, yeah, you still need to do still need to run through this to get the details, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, Ms. Michon, you'd like to start?
Great. I'm going to try sharing in a different format, Christopher. So we're going to give this one more try. Okay, it works. Thank you. For the record, Robert Michaud, Managing Principal of MDM Transportation Consultants, Marlborough, Massachusetts. I'd like to provide a bit more detail to what we've presented to the board to date. It's based on a comprehensive traffic impact and access study that we've prepared, and really is the outcome of a substantial amount of discussion and coordination with Mass DOT as they are continuing to improve the Route 20 corridor in collaboration with the town. Part of what I'll be presenting tonight is a pretext to some of the responses that we provided to peer review. And I know a peer reviewer, Steve Saragusa, is here tonight to the extent the board has specific questions, but I think the idea is to hit those at a very high level as opposed to getting into a lengthy discussion of peer review commentary. So with that as background, what I'd like to do is really cover 4 principal points. There's a recap of the context of this project, which is very important to understand because of everything that's happening and that has happened along Route 20 by way of projects as well as improvements, and how the site sits relative to that. Second, we'll go into detail about specific assumptions on area growth, again, an outcome of conversations with Mass DOT and the town planning department. Third, how much traffic would be generated by this use, what its orientation would be to the area, and what its relative impacts are. And finally, and I believe most importantly, the framework of a mitigation package that is intended to facilitate town action to advance improvements along Route 20. So the site is an industrial zone site within an industrial park. So the context of the project is appropriate, and its relationship to the area is shown here on an aerial basis. It's located immediately proximate to Centec Boulevard, an industrial corridor.
Please, can you magnify?
Image, if you can make it larger.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try doing that.
There you go.
Okay, is that better?
Yep.
Great. You'll see that it's also proximate to Route 20, and what we've studied and included in the impact assessment are the red dot locations, right? That would include to the west, the Lake Street signalized intersection. That's an intersection we've just discussed as part of another project. The South Street intersection to the east, also signalized, and of course, what we believe to be central to the discussion, which is the Route 20 and Centec Boulevard Cherry Street signalized intersection on the Shrewsbury side. We've included the Fortune Boulevard commercial driveway as well, and we do have locations within Grafton that are studied as well. Peer review does raise question as to whether or not supplemental locations would be necessary. And the conclusion is that they're not, and I can get into the reasons why later. These are the principally impacted locations where we know that intersections will sustain a 5% or greater increase in traffic volume. The next slide really provides a better context of what's happening on the Route 20 corridor. And this is in part explaining why we chose the study area that we did. If you look at the westerly portion of Route 20 in the shaded orange area, that's the Edgemere vicinity. That location was subject to a MassWorks improvement project, some $4 million of improvement. Immediately adjacent to that, at Grafton Street, Mass DOT had undertaken a road safety audit. And while that location is operating well below capacity, it doesn't have a capacity constraint, it has some safety-related needs that are under design by Mass DOT. So there's already a focus on improving that location, independent of this project or others. As we focus east, there's, I believe, about a $16 million transportation improvement program that will improve the intersection from South Street and Green Street all the way over to the Route 9 corridor. A very substantial project, which is anticipated to begin construction in 2025. And then, of course, you've got the Centec and Cherry Street intersection signal, which, based on our discussions with the town, is a focal point for an improvement initiative to address a pre-existing need for capacity enhancement. The context of that enhancement rests with the number of area projects that have been proposed, approved, or that are in process that cumulatively really drive up the volume there, independent of this particular project. And they're all numbered here. There are 9 specific projects, one of which we've recently added to their mix because it was recently filed, which is the 5 Millennium 40R project at the very close to the T station. So cumulatively, these projects, when you add the cumulative effect at that central location of Cherry and Centec Boulevard are adding about 100 additional vehicles per hour eastbound, 60 westbound, 60 northbound, and 11 southbound. And during PM peak hours, it's even higher. It's 124 westbound additional vehicles, 85 additional eastbound, 67 on Centec, and 15 on Cherry. So cumulatively, these are driving the need to do something, because no individual project has tripped the need to independently do something there. And that includes projects like Centec Park North, for instance. In discussions with the town, we've identified an interim improvement that could address those cumulative impacts and those needs that exist independent of the project. I will not paint this as something that is a long-term solution, but it is a solution that will not only address the recently approved projects, but also the additional impact that's created by this particular use on Centec Boulevard. And what it entails is a redesignation of the lanes and the arrangement of lanes on Cherry Street and Centec Boulevard, so that the side streets operate much more efficiently and are much more responsive to the actual traffic patterns that have occurred over time. Specifically, if you travel on Centec Boulevard today, there's an exclusive right turn lane, and then there's a through left turn lane, and vice versa on Cherry Street. Well, the patterns actually favor the opposite pattern. You really want to have exclusive left turn lanes and through right turn lanes. And that reduces the amount of conflicting volume within the intersection. It reduces the need for the amount of green time that the side streets require, and it enhances the optimal operation of the intersection generally if you retime it. So we'll put that aside for the time being, and we'll revisit that, but we'll now focus on what the project is anticipated to generate, and I've got to just zoom out a little bit. We've engaged, again, with DOT and the town to understand ways in which we can accurately estimate how much traffic this site will generate. Industry standards are typically applied. The Institute of Transportation Engineers has the trip generation manual, which I'm sure you're aware of. You've heard this many times. It has specific land use categories that typically relate to industrial uses, one of which is called High Bay Parcel Hub. It's a rather generic description of an industrial process, which over time has substantially changed depending on who the operator is, right? Whether you're an Amazon or a UPS or a FedEx. When we looked at applying those industry standards, we were questioned, are those high, are they low, are they accurate to the actual anticipated operation of the facility? So what we did was we went out to nearly identical facilities that are operated by UPS in Indiana and Salt Lake City that are almost precisely the same size, and in fact have a higher throughput or capacity than what's being proposed here. And what I mean by that is that on an hourly basis, these facilities are designed to accommodate a certain output of parcels. This particular project is targeted to generate as much as 58,000 parcels per hour. That's how much it can process. The facilities that we've surveyed in Salt Lake City and Indiana have a 20% higher output capacity. They can process 69,000 packages per hour in roughly the same size building. One facility was 893,000 square feet, another was 832,000 square feet. So on average, the two facilities are right in line with the 850,000 square foot facility that's currently being proposed. Using that empirical data is much more accurate and consistent. It follows industry standard, and it was specifically requested in our discussions with both the town and Mass DOT. So that data, if it's applied here, would show that during peak hours, we would expect 172 vehicles to be coming into the facility from every a combination of directions, and less than 100 leaving. And in the evening peak hours, between 4 and 6 p.m., typical commuter periods, we would expect there to be about just under 300 entering from all directions and 182 leaving. 5,000 total trips over the course of an entire day, about 2,500 in, 2,500 out. What's important to understand about this is, as you look at this table, the vast majority of those trips are shift trips. Those are passenger vehicles by 4-hour shift workers that are coming in as early as 4 in the morning, leaving at 8, and then coming back in at 11 and leaving at 3, and then coming back into twilight and nighttime hours. The shift patterns, the patterns that are associated with truck activity, the brown package trucks that people envision when they hear about a facility like this, are specifically scheduled to occur almost exclusively after 9 in the morning by design. The efficiency of route delivery depends on having roads that are lower volume and uncongested. And so by design, those patterns of trucks have shifted to an after hours, daytime, and returning after 6 p.m. So you'll see in the morning, articulated trucks and single trucks. Single unit trucks, those are the brown package trucks, during a 1 hour period in the morning are 16 per hour. It's a very small number.
How many?
16. There would be 6 coming in and 10 going out. Right? They're very, very minimal because, again, they're specifically scheduled to occur really after 9 in the morning. In the afternoon, some small portion of what left after 9 does begin to come back closer to 6, but most of those are actually coming back closer to between 7 and 7:30 at night. So you'll see that in that middle column, over a 1 hour period, about 44 total brown package truck trips, 33 coming back and 11 going out, right? So they're very modest. Articulated truck activity would be generated from a combination of locations. They could be coming in by rail into the Worcester hub and then transported via the Mass Pike or 290, Route 20. Some could be coming from the 495 corridor. The bulk of these really are going to be oriented to the Route 20 corridor and principally to or from the west. And we'll get into those patterns in a moment. But in terms of articulated trucks, we're talking about, over the course of an hour, about 11 coming in the morning and 15 going out in the morning, and about 26 coming in the evening, 23 going out, about 1 every couple of minutes. Again, almost exclusively oriented to Route 20. Now, I will say that we do, in our traffic report, provide a comparison of these volumes to the industry standards. I will tell you that the morning peak hour trips that I'm presenting here are half what the industry standards would think happens, right? These are very specific to UPS operations. They're proven based on recent full capacity facilities that actually operate at a capacity that's 20% higher.
You're talking what peak, right?
Peak. These are peak. And even in the afternoon, the 480 combined total is still below those industry standards. Even so, we've conducted the analysis as a supplemental analysis to include those much higher volumes in our study to throw a wide blanket on this. And the results aren't that much different. We'll get into that in a moment. Now, this is a snapshot of a peak hour in the morning in this example of taking those inbound and outbound trips and distributing them east and west on Route 20 to Lake Street, to South Street, a portion to the Route 30 corridor in Grafton. 75%, 3 of every 4 trips, is going to be oriented toward the Route 20 corridor. A much smaller percentage will be oriented to the Route 30 corridor in Grafton. We anticipate these approximate numbers in the big arrows on an hourly basis during a peak, and you'll see that they're not drastically high. They're certainly measurable, they're quantifiable. If you look at Worcester Way, for instance, Route 20 eastbound as far west as Sunderland Road, you'll have about 35 vehicles an hour traveling on Route 20 in that direction. 17 coming down Sunderland Road, eventually joining up with 17 from Lake Street. and that totals to 69 vehicles, right, et cetera.
Mr. Mishra, you're talking all vehicles, you're not just talking trailers or
All
delivery
vehicles.
trucks, right?
All vehicles, correct. And we'll speak to the truck, the difference between what I'm presenting here and what the truck numbers are. They're much different. But the patterns for trucks are generally going to follow a similar pattern because of the brown package truck delivery protocols. They'll be going to essentially where the major employment centers are and places of residence. So they'll pretty closely mirror the existing travel patterns. So
That's the brown trucks,
the
but
brown trucks.
the trailers are a different issue.
Trailers are different,
Okay.
again, and we'll cover that in a moment. But these volumes that you see here are total passenger cars, trucks, all in numbers. And you'll see there's no single location where we have greater than about 30 directional additional vehicles per hour being generated. But cumulatively, these are converging on Centec Boulevard and Cherry Street. And that's really the focus of where the impact is and really the discussion. We look at PM peak hour, very similar numbers, right? They are a little bit higher. And then when we begin to focus on the trucks, and this is a specific question in peer review, we've shown this very schematically, but what it shows in blue is the articulated truck volume that we expect and the distribution of where those trucks would be going to and from. And in the brown package trucks and what those patterns would look like. Yes.
Is that already in the study?
It's in the-
That graphic?
It's in the peer review response.
It is?
Actually, I'm sorry, it's not, let me take that back. Our response in peer review articulates this, but does not have the graphic.
Oh, okay.
Right, so this is the first time you've probably seen this. We
I'm
wanted
gonna
to
take
make,
that and frame it, so that's why I want.
we try to match the color of the truck too.
Yeah, right.
But this is a much easier way to understand what these relative changes are likely to look like from a truck percentage perspective. And what it shows is that the brown package trucks, again, 3 or 4 of those we expect will be going up to Route 20 because it goes to Worcester Way, it goes back to Route 9. Certainly to the north because that's where residents are within the town. The access to those by brown package trucks, the smaller vehicles, would be most efficient using Cherry Street to Gold Street to 140 connection, for instance, or a South Street connection or a Lake Street connection, because that's where people live, right? The articulated vehicles will use principal arterial routes as a regular practice. So Route 140, for instance, would have a handful of trucks being generated, et cetera. Yes?
Can I interrupt you 1 second? Kuwait, a ways back, got to be at least 20 years. There's a truck restriction put on Gold Street.
On Gold, correct, right.
Right.
Yep.
So,
And that applies here, by the way.
yes, I know.
And I'll clarify why, we're assuming that brown package trucks would actually use that route, because they would not be bound to a truck exclusion, because their purpose is to make a local delivery along that route.
Okay, we won't get into the weeds on that right now, but I got you, good.
Yeah, so the point is, if you live on Cherry Street, if you live on Gold Street, and
You're
that's
gonna get- Right,
a designated route, that would be a brown package truck route.
right.
An articulated vehicle has no business being on any of those local roads, and they wouldn't be, as a practical matter.
Right.
And they would be legally restricted, to your point, from doing so on Gold Street. So in the blue, we're showing the vast majority of these to be westbound on Route 20. They go into Worcester Way to hubs that exist in Worcester, for instance, or they may be coming off the Mass Pike to or from. So the vast majority are there. We've conservatively assumed that some portion of those might use Route 30 to get to Pike. It's not as efficient, and I think most people who understand the area and grew up here, like I did, you probably wouldn't do that, but we've assumed that some portion of trucks could do that. And if you look at any one of these numbers, they're not large numbers. They are pretty well distributed, and they're vastly, almost exclusively bound to the principal arterial of Route 20. The PM numbers look similar, and that's what the second graphic looks like. Now, as we look at the cumulative effect of where all of this principally passenger traffic converges, it's really at the signal at Centec and Cherry at Route 20. And this graphic illustrates what that combined volume looks like. These are all in volumes. These are trucks plus passenger cars. There aren't any through vehicles being introduced on Route 20, right? These are turning either onto or from Centec Boulevard. From the west, principally, 69 vehicles per hour, about a vehicle a minute coming in, making a right turn, 34 per hour making a left turn, one every 2 minutes, about one every 2 minutes coming in from Cherry Street, and then reverse, less than one per minute leaving.
I don't want to break up your rhythm on your presentation, but can we stop on that for a second?
Sure.
Am I understanding you correctly that the number of vehicles on Route 20 is not going to change?
The through traffic volumes, the volumes in the through lane, if you're heading eastbound in the morning,
Okay,
right? We're not adding additional volume to that through traffic flow.
Right.
What we are doing is we're introducing additional traffic to the right turn onto Centec Boulevard.
right. And I think the number's like 69 vehicles.
Yes.
Where are they coming from if the traffic on Route 20 is not increasing? Or is it increasing, but you're talking about just through traffic's not increasing?
Yeah, so let me just back up to make it crystal clear. So this overall graphic shows in very small numbers every single movement that's being increased along the Route 20 corridor. And there are movements on Route 20. So for instance, at Lake Street, there are 52 additional vehicles through that signal as a through movement on the way to this facility. And then there are an additional 26 coming from Cherry Street, which, you know, in fact, you've got 17 left turns off of Lake joining with 52 to make the 69.
Okay, so there is more traffic on Route 20.
Absolutely.
But the through traffic number is going to stay the same.
At the intersection of Centec Boulevard.
Right, and that makes sense, because every time I look at that, I was trying to figure out how that happened, and I even went back and I could not figure it out, but
Yeah.
now it makes sense.
Yeah, okay, so thank you for asking for the clarification. So really, the purpose of this graphic is to say, look at, I showed an earlier graphic showing the cumulative volumes from other already approved projects, none of which have made any contribution to mitigation here or elsewhere along Route 20. And they're substantial. These are the additional volumes that are specific to this project. They're actually far less than those cumulative effects, but they are adding to that cumulative effect. And if we look at the PM version of this, the volumes are a bit higher. Right turn movement on a Centec went from 69 in the morning to 119 in the
Right.
evening. It's about 2 vehicles a minute. So we are increasing volumes here, but they're manageable increases, and they're not increases on what we call the critical intersection movements, which, you know, in the evening, as an example, would be a westbound through movement. We're not introducing additional through traffic there. We're actually absorbing them as a left turn onto Centec Boulevard. It further up on Route 20, it's certainly increasing, but when they get to this intersection, they're then turning off of Route 20. So, so really, given that as a context, we've done a very detailed analysis using approved standards that are subject to peer review. And we're assuming, based on our discussions with the town, that there will be an implementation of near-term improvements at Centec and Cherry, right, based on the prior drawing that I showed. And with those in place, acceptable levels of service can be achieved, right? Is the improvement there a magic bullet solution? It is not, right? Mass DOT and the town are both aware and are continuing to pursue longer-term improvements that are needed, independent of what we're doing here, and that's just part of the story.
So acceptable ranges, you're talking about that intersection?
Yes, any intersection.
No, but I know, but this, what we were just talking about, you were talking about the intersection.
Yes. So
We weren't talking about capacity on 20 that might be driving by, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So volumetrically, that's what these tables are, and there's a lot of numbers and letters on this. But I've highlighted the most impacted location, which is the Cherry and Centec Boulevard intersection, and I can kind of zoom this in a little. And what it shows, and I mentioned this before, is that an acceptable operating standard, as is defined in the state, is a level of service D or better operation. It doesn't mean that queuing won't happen. It means that the average amount of stopped delay that a motorist experiences should be less than a certain level, which at level of service D is 40 seconds or so, or less. And actually it's 50. And in this table, this is a weekday morning peak hour, you can see the baseline conditions at that location are at B or better. There are C's, northbound and southbound. Those go to D in one example because you've got this other cumulative growth independent of the project. And then eventually when the town implements an interim improvement, that actually improves, goes back down to C, and it remains a C with this project in place. Morning's not the issue. Evening is the issue at that location. Anyone who travels that on a regular basis knows that. Any other location that we've studied is well below capacity, level of service C or better at virtually every location within Shrewsbury. That level of service C or better operation is an outcome of the improvements that have been recently implemented on Route 20 at Lake Street, for instance, or that are in process east of here from South Street moving east. So there aren't any capacity constraints per se along Route 20 in Shrewsbury, but the focus is what happens here where all of that volume converges for our site. The PM is a bit different. Today, there's already a capacity constraint at Centec and Cherry Street. If you're traveling northbound on Centec Boulevard today, there are long delays. There's long queues. Not so much on Cherry Street, but as you add that cumulative growth that I mentioned, independent of the project, those go to failing conditions, bad failing conditions, because they don't match the correct volume patterns that the lane assignments should. With the interim improvements that the town is advancing, that can be resolved to a level of service D or better. Not only to account for that cumulative growth, the background projects, but also, in this analysis, the additional trips that are being created by the UPS facility, D or better, yes.
Can I just ask a question about, if you're thinking that it's just, I'm simplifying this, like a relabeling of the lanes, wouldn't that ultimately then mean that there needs to be some reconfiguration of the signalization if you're creating a left lane turn?
Yeah.
Or, oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yes.
Just so that's clear in my brain.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because I simplified it, but the concept plan, which I'll show again, actually does show a reconfiguration of the signal indicators and a retiming of the signal and an optimization of how that actually is phased. It is a combination of redesignating lanes and the indicators and working with the signal controller to optimize the way that it works. And when you do that, you can much more efficiently accommodate those new traffic patterns. Okay.
Thank you.
And as was the case in the morning, all of the other locations that we've studied within Shrewsbury are D or better. They're all acceptable operations. No surprise because there's a lot of infrastructure that's in process right now. Now, with that, we'll get into kind of a mitigation framework. The objectives of this project are to provide safe and efficient access to and from the site, hands down. It has to operate that way. The site, you've seen the site plan, but the site access is designed so that any of the employee-related trips are going to and from Centennial Drive into the property via that intersection that already exists. And there'll be a new truck driveway along Centennial as well to physically separate those two functions of the building. All of those designs are compliant with good industry standards, with sight lines and visibility, et cetera. The other objective, of course, is to ensure there's adequate capacity on every intersection that this facility would rely on to get people safely to work and for trucks to get to or from the facility. And with that, there's really two components of the mitigation framework that are being discussed and have been discussed with the town, and they comprise a $900,000 aggregate funding amount, a portion of which would offset any cost associated with the interim improvements that I just mentioned. The interim improvements are roughly $100,000 or less, leaving a balance of $800,000 of funds that could be used to advance and complete a design of longer-term improvements along Route 20. That's important to understand that there can be no construction funding application without a design, right? Design has to precede an application to Mass DOT to secure construction funding. And this project, through its contribution, funding contribution, would allow that design to happen, and for the town to then be in a position to advocate and apply for appropriate funding, as was the case with the other segments of Route 20, east and west of this particular area. Now, that number, I want to put in context, the proponents' impact from a capacity standpoint to the most impacted location, which is Route 20 and Centec Boulevard, is about 8 to 9% of the capacity of that intersection. The long-range improvements, which were identified in the Route 20 corridor study, have a value of roughly $4 million in that vicinity for that intersection upgrade. If you were to take a proportional share of the responsibility for that, it would represent a financial contribution of $480,000, roughly. The applicant has doubled that. They see the value in providing infrastructure funding to the town for purposes of offsetting the interim improvement, which is necessary because of other cumulative growth, also accommodates their need, and advancing a long-term design that would put the town in position to leverage construction funding, just like happened east and west of us. The second piece of this relates to Grafton, which is subject of another meeting, but they've taken a proportional position on that as well. Grafton is taking the same tact. In Grafton, we're talking about the potential need for a signal at Route 30. The 40R project at 5 Millennium Drive has committed between $33,000 and $36,000 for proportional funding to make that happen. This project, again, only has about an 8 to 9% impact there, which would represent about a $70,000 proportional contribution. Applicant is offering $150,000 to accelerate, making that happen. So we've talked about the interim improvement. You can see in this diagram, on the left side of the diagram, what this change in phasing and sequencing of the signal will be. This is the plan that would need to be engineered and would be subject to town permitting at DOT. And then, of course, on the Route 30 side, future signal at Route 30, right? As a recap to peer review, and we're not going to get into the details, there's really 4 principal points I want to make as a precursor to that discussion. One, many of the comments that were issued were just simply asking for backup information or clarifying things. The substantive comments had to do with whether or not the study area should be expanded, for instance, and we've addressed that by indicating a more definitive tracing of the trips that indicates that locations outside of what we studied sustain less than a 5% change in volume. And the standards for traffic impact studies and assessments would have substantially impacted locations defined as those sustaining a 5% or greater impact. So we're not changing the dial, we're not changing the volume conditions at other locations enough to warrant a detailed assessment. The one location, and I mentioned this when I started, was Grafton Street or Route 20, which will sustain about a 7% change in volume, but as through volumes. That's not going to change the levels of service, which are well documented as part of the Edgemere filing, as one filing, to be well below capacity, and already subject to design improvements by Mass DOT. So including that didn't make sense in our standpoint. It could be included as an academic exercise, but there's really no value to doing that. Certainly on Route 140, de minimis change in volume, principally a handful of trucks per hour that may be inclined to use it to get to Route 20 from the north. We've updated safety analysis. There's no change from what we've documented. The growth assumptions that we've used were vetted very carefully with Mass DOT and in discussions with the town. The growth rate here effectively represents as much as almost a 3% annualized change, which has never happened on any town road in Shrewsbury, including all of the developments that we've been personally involved with. So we believe it's still a fairly conservative representation of volume, but it's certainly appropriate. We've added in 5 Millennium, as I mentioned, and none of that changed the analysis results materially. We've talked about trip generation. I will say that the analysis results that I've just presented at D or better remain at D or better, even if we use the industry standard rates, which in the morning are twice what the empirical information shows. So the results that I've presented are not sensitive to fluctuations in what those volumes look like, and we've documented that in the traffic report. So we're very comfortable with the analysis. And of course, we've already discussed the mitigation framework. So that's a real high-level overview. We believe that we've responded well to the peer review, but we want to engage further with the peer reviewer to make sure that every base has been covered. And that'll be subject of, I believe, another hearing. With that, I'll defer to Mark on anything he'd like to add, in particular the mitigation framework, which was a question of peer review as well.
I guess just to highlight and recall that the matter we're before you for is for site plan approval, is I think the mitigation plan demonstrates the commitment that Prologis and UPS made very early in this process when we first met with the city, with the town manager, that we wanted to make this a partnership. There is a mutual interest in limiting traffic congestion along Route 20. There is a certain personal interest to UPS to have some consistency and know what traffic patterns are going to be. And for people who travel on that road on a regular basis and have a frustration of it, improvements are well thought of. That's why the concept of a capacity allocation procedure, which is being used more and more in communities to determine what percentage people should pay toward the aggregate, so somebody doesn't end up by spinning the wheel and getting stuck with the whole thing, is being used. It's most recently being used in Grafton there. That gets to a lower number, but we're interested in getting the work done. We're interested in having the plans prepared so that the town can seek financing or initiatives in order to be able to do the work, and that's why it's essentially being doubled in that case. The concept would be that particularly for the near term, we would pay that contribution of $100,000 with the building permit, with the hope that that would allow the town to do the work as early as spring or summer of 2025, well before we'll be using the intersection, other than for construction purposes, obviously, but to get it done and solve the existing problem that exists there for the town. And with that, we're glad to answer any particular questions the board may have with regard to traffic.
Okay, let me preface the rest of this discussion by, how late do you want to stay?
As long as you want.
Be careful. I have a bunch of questions, but before I do that, anybody have any specific questions they want to ask right now?
Not right now.
I have a couple. The near-term improvement that you are suggesting is not much related to the infrastructure, but it's like restriping at some of those 1 or 2 intersections to have better traffic flow, right? Is that fair characterization?
It is. It eliminates the conflicting movements that currently occur between left turns and through movements, and allocates the green time in a much more efficient way to eliminate the conflict and allow that flow to occur more efficiently. That's essentially what that is. The level of service on Route 20, it's not a morning issue. Traffic flow through there is pretty efficient, actually, in the morning. In the evening, there can be a longer queue westbound.
Absolutely.
Right, so I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, it's, anyone who travels through there, including me, experiences that. But the experience it as a kind of a rolling queue is what I call it. The length of time that you're actually stopped falls well within the bounds of the capacity, the level of service capacity that I just mentioned, the D standard. But there is queuing that happens there. And that's the subject of a longer-term improvement that would mirror what's happening east of here, right? Adding an additional lane is the bottom line.
In a broader sense, looks like Shrewsbury is going to take a lot more of the impact, whereas Grafton is going to get a lot more of the benefit of this project. I'm still a bit puzzled. A project of this size still, last time you mentioned that it's not triggering some of the MEPA thresholds. I thought there was one of those impervious surface as well as the number of parking spaces that might trigger is what I thought. But again, it's MEPA's call, but I'm still kind of surprised that it was not going to trigger me.
Any number of thresholds as far as the size or magnitude of the project for this project would be applicable in MEPA. It
Yeah.
goes through any number of those. But there's a corresponding portion that creates MEPA jurisdiction, for lack of a better term, and that is the requirement of a state permit. And the project itself does not require a state permit. It does not, the property itself does not abut a state highway, and the determination as to what constitutes an access permit has clearly said that's what you have to do, either have a direct cut or have your property abutting a state highway. This is obviously, as you know, quite away from the state highway itself. None of the other infrastructure requires state permit, it's all local permitting, and therefore MEPA jurisdiction is not triggered.
And you consulted Mass DOT and they were okay with that?
Yes,
Yes, we have.
we've engaged in those conversations. This is a much different project than, say, project earlier presented, which directly abuts state highway, for which a direct access permit is required, for instance. This is not that type of project.
Is that because Route 20 is US highway or?
Well, Route 20 is state jurisdiction highway, we're half a mile or so south of that, so we don't have any adjacency or requirement for permitting as a result.
Thank you.
Can I just taking I understand that there is not a state permit, but that wouldn't, talking about relabeling lanes, granted, I understand that is on the boulevard and on Cherry Street, but then also looking at reconfiguring of traffic signalizations, that, in my mind, is a state DOT action.
It is,
So
sure.
wouldn't that then, it's not a permit, but it's a state action?
It is, but it's also work being done by the community for an existing problem the community presently has. So the town would be applying for the state access permit to make those improvements within the state jurisdiction of the intersection. They would not be related to the project. We are simply funding something to cure an existing problem that exists today.
Okay.
Right, and because I've been involved with the town for so many years now, that intersection has been the subject of prior studies, Centec Park North in particular, and we've engaged in prior conversations with the state about that intersection, and ultimately, a quarter study was conducted, as you're aware, for the entire quarter of Route 20. And that was driven by a need and a recognition that there's a lot of development happening along the quarter that no specific individual project was able to solve, right? So the state undertook this larger, longer-term study, and now the implementation of pieces of that have occurred in at least 2 areas of the quarter as a result of that study. So It's really being driven by the cumulative effect of growth here, and this particular intersection is an outcome, its need is an outcome of those cumulative impacts. And that's why the town is looking to advance that improvement to address those cumulative impacts. We're coming in as number 10 in line, so to speak, and yes, we're gonna contribute eventually to that same number, but the idea behind the interim improvement is it's needed now, it's needed today. Probably should have happened 5 years ago. And that's really a town action, and the town would be the permit seeker in that case.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think just providing a little bit of clarification here in terms of the long-term funding, long-range improvements. That roadway improvement is MassDOT controlled, and so that would be a MassDOT project. I think it's somewhat tenuous to say that the town has agreed to accept the funding and pass that on to MassDOT for the completion of that project, or would do the improvements themselves, as that's state-controlled roadway. So in terms of the basis of that long-range funding, I think that's something that needs to be proved out a little bit more. Also note that MassDOT has not formally completed their review yet, and so that's still ongoing. I don't doubt that the applicant has consulted with them, at least preliminarily, but those formal discussions are still, or the formal report from MassDOT has not yet been received, so.
So let me follow up on that. When I read the traffic study, the report, I read that the town was going to do work on that intersection, and it kind of surprised me. I have talked to the town manager 3 separate times to say, what he told me, are you sure? And he said, yes. I talked to the planner, I talked to the engineer, and I talked to the assistant town manager. They all say, you can take it for what it's worth, that there is no activity on the part of the town, and there is no plan to do any work on that intersection. So somebody's misunderstanding somebody. I think Chris's thing is more to the point of if we wanted to do something and wanted to get it on the tip, we could get it up to 25% and give it to the state. But I think your folks got to talk to the town manager, because they insist that there is nothing going on with that intersection. So take it for what it's worth.
And we certainly will, and appreciate the comment. I think it's important to segregate the 2 critical components of the mitigation we're offering. One being the short term, which has only the changing of the lanes and the timing and that work, which we've discussed. We are not suggesting that the town is going to undertake to make physical improvements, what's so-called the long-term improvements to the intersection. What we are suggesting is we're prepared to make a contribution of money to advance the project, to hopefully either put the town in a better position to do it, or to advocate for MassDOT to do it in some fashion. We're not suggesting the town's gonna undertake all of that work.
Then you need to rewrite the report, because the way it reads to everybody on this side of the table is that we are actively pursuing rebuilding that intersection,
Okay, we'll straighten.
all right?
That is not what we've discussed with the town, it's not our expectation.
No, that's why I kept asking. I said, well, how? But I think you should just pursue the discussion with them. Let me follow up a little bit on the MEPA thresholds. I'm no MEPA expert. He's the MEPA expert, actually. But there are items in what the thresholds are that say that it doesn't make any difference if you're a half a mile away. I know that thing because we dealt with that in Boylston when they built FedEx. But we're having trouble understanding how it says there are thresholds here that would trigger some kind of a study. And I know that if MassDOT feels strongly about it and they think they're correct, they're gonna do it. Maybe they won't. But can you explain that the amount of impervious surface, the number of parking spaces, et cetera, aren't triggering that? Because in the traffic going up to Route 20, because it's gonna affect that state highway. How, I don't understand how I guess it doesn't only have to be MIPA, but it sounds like what's happening is if we don't have jurisdiction over it, which we know we don't, and there's not a MIPA process or some type of process to review this stuff and see what needs to be done from the state's perspective, then how does it get resolved that, just say for sake of argument, we think an intersection needs to be looked at, might need it to be improved, at least studied. And as an applicant, they're saying, no, we looked at it, it doesn't need any more study, it doesn't meet the threshold. There's no higher level at MassDOT that looks at that and says, oh, wait a minute. No, it does need something, or, you know what, you're right, it doesn't. How does that work? Because it doesn't, as a layman, doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that we've consulted with Mass DOT in collaboration with the town, frankly. Now, I've been doing this for 36 years now, and I can tell you that there are many industrial, commercial, residential projects that would meet a MIPA threshold as they're defined either for vehicular generation, parking increases, increase in impervious area. There's a whole host of thresholds, but that needs to be paired with the need for a state highway or a state action, a state permit. In the drafting of the MIPA regulations, that would mean that a site abuts state highway but does not seek direct access onto a highway, or it seeks direct access onto the highway. There are many projects that could be located a mile or 2 or 3 miles away from state highway that have a measurable impact to state highway. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're then tripped into the MIPA process as a result.
Okay.
For this particular project, it's different than the example of the earlier project, which directly abuts state highway, for which a driveway highway access permit is required, right? This project took upon itself to consult early with Mass DOT, again, in collaboration with the town, to understand what that impact is. And this is the outcome of that. So it's not that it's not being studied, it's studied in a format that's precisely in line with the obligations that any project would have to do if they did file with MIPA. So we're doing that analysis, but we're not seeking a permit or a state action as a result of the project.
Okay, so, all right. There's 5,000 vehicles gonna be added to that, to route, sake of argument, 5,000, maybe 4,000, 4,300 are gonna be added to Route 20 when this thing is built out.
Actually, 75% of that number would be, right?
Yeah. I don't understand how you as proponents could say that it's not gonna have a significant impact, that we need to do something more on that road.
Sure.
And you can tell me about the peak, but, you know, it's kind of like we talk about the town center at 3:30, 4 o'clock till, what time, 5:36? You think you're in downtown Boston, and then you can shoot a cannon down the road. even if this traffic's spread out, and yeah, maybe it doesn't, fit into the peak hour scenario, it still could be filling the volume or the capacity of that road at other times of the day, right?
Those other lower volume hours of the day would sustain more traffic, right? But not at the levels that occur during the peak hours. I agree.
Okay. Can you understand how, I've been around this stuff for a while because of all the permitting that I've been exposed to. I'm no expert on this. I'm not saying I am. If I have a little bit of knowledge of it, enough to be dangerous, and I'm not comprehending how this works, then, and I know it's not, I guess it's not your problem, but how do you think the public is going to understand 5,000 vehicles, 4,000 vehicles on that road when the place opens, and it's not going to have an impact? Let me rephrase that. A noticeable impact beyond that morning peak and the afternoon peak. How can you even explain that to them?
Yeah, so I think the framework for analyzing these really is to look at the worst hour of the day and to see what happens during that hour. If you can demonstrate that during that worst hour of the day that your combined impact meets an acceptable operating standard, it only gets better during the other hours of the day. We're not saying that you don't increase volume at 10 in the morning, 11, 2. We're not saying that. We're saying that, and to your example, you drive downtown and at 7 o'clock at night you can shoot a cannonball down the street, right? Those other hours are not the so-called critical hours. It doesn't mean that additional traffic won't happen during those hours. It means that your ability to travel through the downtown area at 7 o'clock is a much different experience than it is at 5 o'clock.
Okay. So, because if I lose my train of thought, I'll never get back. Between Centec and Route 140, westbound goes down to one lane. You've driven it. You know what happens westbound at night,
Yes.
right? I try not to go on it. If I don't have to, I don't. So we've got this congestion, whatever you want to call it, but the traffic is backing up. It's not unusual to see it back up to Hebitz and sometimes all the way to Centec. It does happen. I've been in it. How can you say when you do one of these studies that road can handle the traffic at rush hour? It can't handle it now.
Right, so that's why we do a capacity analysis, and that's why there's a peer review process, and there's a framework that's been established, a professional framework to be able to quantify that. And it's important to be able to quantify it and apply criteria and standards because there is often a distinct difference between the perception and what someone perceives to be, as you call it,
Right.
congestion, and the amount of actual delay someone's experiencing when you measure it. And as engineers, we need to be able to put these criteria out there to quantify this. Otherwise, it becomes a subjective discussion. Right? I don't disagree that there will be times of the year or days of the week when something might have happened at the Route 140 interchange that causes something to happen in turn on Route 20. There are many reasons why those types of conditions happen.
That's different.
Right. But if you take the westbound example, right, and I'm not sugarcoating this, I travel Route 20, you'll hit what is about a 30-car queue, right?
Right.
I've traveled all the way through that queue without having to stop, right? I might be traveling slower. I might feel like I'm being is within an acceptable range as it's defined in the criteria that we're all obligated to live by and document and report. The incremental change of this project to that queue is far less than the cumulative effect of all of these other projects that have been reviewed and approved, some built, Edgemere among them, which when you go to, coincidentally, when you go back and actually look at their performance, often and almost exclusively always perform at a lower level than what the studies had predicted. That is the case for Edgemere. We know that the volumes on Route 20 are about 15 to 20% lower than they were pre-pandemic, and they're staying there. We know that the historic growth patterns on Route 20 are not 2 or 3% per year. They're 0.23% per year with the projects that have been approved and built on the corridor. So there's a very distinct difference between a perception that a driver might have and what we need to do as engineers for projects to say, in quantitative terms, will this work? It will work. Other hours of the day will work better than what we're reporting.
Okay, pursuant
I-
to, go ahead, Julie.
I have, can you explain to me, talk to me a little bit about the ratings that you were referencing earlier? I heard a B rating, a D rating, and then there, at some point there was something is subject to fail. Now, in my brain, A is the best, D is the worst, and then you go to fail. So can you, like, is that a correct way of looking at it, or how?
Right. As you approach anything with delay greater than a D rating, right, so you're in the E category, the frequency in which queue could fluctuate from one day to the next grows, right? So you could take the downtown as an example. You could travel through there and it took me 2 minutes today to get through that downtown. Downtown is functioning at an F, right? The same time of day, the next day later might take you 4 minutes, 5 minutes, right? As you approach what we call level of service E or F, your ability to efficiently travel through an intersection or along a roadway is greatly diminished, right? And it's subject to a lot of other factors. Is it raining out? Was there a crash? At level of service D or better, the variability in that experience is much less. It's much more consistent experience, if you will, by the motorist. And that threshold of D has been established and recognized within Massachusetts as being an appropriate design standard to achieve, right?
That, so is that looked at as adequate versus optimal?
Well, is it better to have a C than a D? Yes. Is it much more inconvenient to have a D rather than a C? No. So these criteria, we could talk about this all night long, but I guess what I'd say is that Mass DOT is one agency, targets the D as an appropriate operating standard, right? Once you go beyond there, you may be looking at having to do mitigation.
And we're at a D right now.
We're on Centec and at the intersection right now, we're at an E, which will be converted to a C with the improvements and become a D with our project. So we're actually, if you look at how the intersection functions.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of, it's bubblegum for the brain to some extent, but we're not reducing the efficiency of the intersection as a result of the project, assuming that the interim improvements are in place to take care of the interim growth patterns of other approved projects.
Okay.
That's,
Mr. McGolder.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to mention, and it may be a difference between how planners look at level of service and traffic engineers. Certainly, I'm not a traffic engineer, but in relation to that, I think it's somewhat dangerous to look at level of service as better or worse. I think it needs to be a more comprehensive review. Certainly, we're looking at the intersection in this case, but in terms of free flow of traffic being an A and lower flows of traffic, I think it's important when we review level of service data that we look at it more comprehensively in terms of the context of the road and the intersection where it is. Certainly, in locations like a downtown, you do not want necessarily free-flow traffic when traffic is moving, extremely fast through a pedestrian-oriented area. It creates danger, it creates incompatibility with those types of uses. So I just want to encourage the board to think about it more comprehensively than a better or worse case. I think it's looking at level of service in relation to the context of the roadway and the intersection that's being studied. So a lowering of a level of service in some cases may be beneficial. I understand that.
I understand. But I've been beyond a level of service. I'm just use that as a starting point. But do you have any questions or comments? Because if you don't, I want to finish up what I was doing. But if you've got any questions or comments,
Just have one, so go ahead.
No, I don't,
Yeah.
everything's been sort of.
okay. But I'll tell you what.
One last clarification. You mentioned at Centec, the level of service now is at E. Is that including all the projects that are approved and yours, or even without any of these projects, is the current service at E?
Right. This table on the board shows the existing operating levels for each of the approaches of the intersection in the evening, in this
Yeah.
example. Baseline today, without any additional growth or projects, as E northbound,
Wow.
80-second delay
Right now, without any of these projects?
right now. And
Evening? Or
what's that?
is that evening?
That's evening, correct. You get the train station releasing, for instance, we're the designer of record for the gas station in the corner. We put a do not block the box marking there for a reason. So it's been a long-known issue. When we worked on Centec Park North, DOT quizzed us on that, It's not a new or surprising issue. It's a pre-existing issue. And cumulatively, the 9 other projects beside ours are adding, substantially more pressure to that intersection that are going to drive those E's to F's, right? And not only for Centec, but for Cherry Street as well. So that's what we've discussed with the town, and the town acknowledges and is pursuing this interim improvement to address that issue. And, the applicant and the applicant's role in that process is to advance funding through an infrastructure fund that has 2 prongs. One prong is to say, we recognize the town's it's gonna cost money to do that. So we'll take care of that, $100,000 rough estimate. And the balance is, we also acknowledge the need, because no one else is stepping up to the plate here, that to get infrastructure funding for the remainder of Route 20, you need to advance a design. That's how that process works. And here's some money to do that. It's probably more money than you need to do that design. It's a substantial commitment to advance well beyond the 25%. It's probably the 100% design plan.
For the intersection?
For the intersection and all the way up to South Street.
You mean to do the design work?
To do the design work for that whole segment.
Thank you.
Okay. November and December, at least, UPS's business goes through the roof. Right? I mean, I don't think anybody's gonna deny that. We know it, we see it around here. They have to get extra areas to store their trailers, and they hire a lot of people for Christmas. Right? For 2 or 3 months. Those people, what I had asked before is, the year-round stable workforce, because that's gonna relate to vehicle trips. Is it 300? Is it 400? Is it 800? And they hire 200 people at Christmas? I don't think that's the way it works from people I know who work there. So, I know that the consultant asked the question about the seasonality.
Right.
She asked the question about the seasonality, quite honestly, because I asked her.
Okay. Fair question, too.
Okay? So, if they're running at, throw a number out, 400 people during the year, off-season, not holiday season. Just like when I was in retail, I didn't have the same amount of people almost the whole year, except for what we had at Christmas. And then you're gonna have this big spike of traffic on a road that, for the most part, I know you can go out to Grafton, has got one primary exit or entrance to get out of there, right? Route 20, one way or the other. You're either going across the street or you're going each way. Why can't we get the information on what happens to vehicle trips so we know and we're comfortable with? Maybe it does change a lot. Maybe it doesn't change a lot. But I think we need to know that, because if you're looking at a peak in March, a peak hour, March, either morning or afternoon, you're looking at one in December on that road, because let's face it, UPS is going to drive the traffic on that road. 5,000 cars a day. It's going to drive. It's going to be the big driver of traffic on that road, right?
It's certainly going to be measurable.
24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of commercial and industrial uses that drive a lot of volume there, and folks who are coming to or from Worcester.
Well, we'll have to look at it, but it's still a big fish, right? Why can't we be told if there is a difference in the holiday season, so we know the questions to ask of, like, well, what about this? What about that?
Sure. Yep.
Why isn't that a valid question? And why can't we get the number? I don't care about the number of employees. I want vehicle trips.
We can elaborate on that. The short answer is this, that yes, there is a change in the shift time that relates to those seasonal conditions. Typical shift time is 4 hours. That goes to a 3.5-hour shift.
Mm-hmm.
The shift pattern is specifically designed to avoid the peak hours, right? The periods that we're most concerned with, and that in this example UPS is concerned with because of the efficiencies or lack thereof of getting places, is that even with expanded employment levels, they're designed specifically in a way to avoid increasing the amount of peak activity during those traditional hours. And that said, the other factor to consider is that we've relied on empirical information that's based on facilities that have a 20% higher throughput than what is being proposed here, right? 69,000 packages per hour, Indiana and Salt Lake City, 58,000 here. We've used that higher output empirical information to apply to this facility. We're conservatively estimating on that basis.
Okay. One of those numbers, the traffic numbers, are averaged. So what? You spread it out during the day, that's the average. You can use an average to make things look a lot smoother and a lot less problematic.
Right.
There is one of those, I got it in here somewhere, that the footnote says it's the average.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
So one of the ways to think of this is, and I mentioned this earlier, we also applied industry standard rates to this, and what I'm showing on the board right now is what the comparison is between what we've used for empirical information and what's estimated using ITE, high cube parcel hub numbers, right? And you'll see for high cube parcel hub, 600 cars an hour. We actually used that number in the analysis, in the traffic study, and ran those numbers and still demonstrated that it works.
Right. So let me be clear, because if I was giving you the impression that I thought that UPS is gonna crash Route 20 and they're the only one responsible for it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, it doesn't make any difference if it's UPS, if it's those other 9 projects. Traffic engineers seem like they're focused on peak. People who live in the area focus on their experience all during the day. And I know you say it's not subjective, but if every time you go out on a road, and 10 years ago you could drive down that road without any problem, and now it takes you 10 minutes longer to get from one end to the other, in everybody's mind, it's a problem. But you guys focus on peak. And I understand why you focus on peak. But it almost seems as though, and not you in particular,
It's the industry.
it's the industry.
Yeah.
It still affects people all day long. And if those numbers really change, you can say perception. I can give you an example. I used to be able to drive from A to B on Route 9 10 years ago between 5 and 8 minutes faster than I can right now. Okay? Because when I go to a light, the queues are longer. And it just works out that way. That's a degradation in service overall. You can say what you want about the peak. I mean, my experience is I used to be able to drive on a road that was, you could move along pretty quickly. Now I can't, right?
But isn't that a byproduct of the fact that the study's already identified 9 projects that utilize Route 20 as its primary corridor? There is going to be more traffic on Route 20, which is going to mean travel is going to go slower.
Well, let's acknowledge that, okay?
I don't think anybody's disagreeing with it.
Well,
I think that, if I could finish, I think the point Mr. Michaud is trying to make is what you look at is the worst possible time when the most people are trying to move. And if you can determine that that's adequate, there's no empirical reason to think that it's going to be a worse situation on a non-peak. It's not to say it's a panacea non-peak. It is still more traffic, more people traveling on the roadway because of the 9 projects, because of the background growth, because this is the 10th and it's going to be 11, and Millennium's an 11th,
Right. And with those other 9 together, and I'm not blaming you, those things are going to go up, according to your study, average 3% a year, right?
Yeah,
2.78
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
They're building on each other so that the level of traffic and the speed that you can move through on a relatively local road like Route 20 or Route 140 is going to slow you down. It isn't, I'm not picking on UPS. I'm just saying it happens.
No, you're absolutely right, Chair. In fact, that's the reason the Route 20 quarter study was completed, and that's the reason that the $16 million is being spent just east of here, and $4 million was spent recently west of here.
Right.
So improvements to address what you're pointing to happen over time, but incrementally, right? And Route 20 has been very much a focus of DOT in the town because of the number of projects that cumulatively have been adding traffic to the corridor. So this middle section of Route 20, between where it left off near Grafton Street and where it's picking back up at South Street, is the missing tooth, so to speak.
Right.
And this project is one of many projects, is stepping up and providing an infrastructure commitment, a funding commitment that will allow and leverage an application for those additional funds. That can only happen if you design what they are, petition DOT, and get in line.
Okay. But just 2 other things and I'll stop. You did separate the package trucks and the trailers, so
Yep.
That was the question. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you or did you not look at the interchange 140 and Route 20?
We did not include it in the study. It was included in the Edgemere study.
Well, I don't care about, it doesn't make any difference, but
Well, the reason we didn't include it is because the additional trips that we would expect to use the connection from 140 to Route 20 is de minimis for this project. If you're an employee who's going to this facility, it would take you twice as long to go down Route 20, Route 140, to get through the interchange, to get to Centec, to go south, than to go
in traffic,
Gold to Cherry and down,
right.
right? And vice versa.
Well,
And-
I'm thinking more trucks. I'm thinking more of the delivery trucks
Oh,
and the trailer trucks,
right. Well,
okay?
Right.
We know that trailer trucks from UPS, along with a million other companies, are using 140. They're driving up to Shrewsbury Center. What's gonna happen when we get a much bigger distribution facility? It's gonna have a lot more trailers. Is there gonna be more traffic going up 140, wherever those trucks goes? I have no idea why they do it, but they do it all the time. Are we gonna get more traffic there? Nobody's answered that question.
Right. The 30,000-foot level answer is that there's a high reliance on the Route 20 west connection because of its orientation to transportation hubs that trailers arrive on. There isn't such a reliance on a northerly connection using Route 140. We don't expect Route 140 is going to serve as a primary articulated tractor-trailer route for this facility.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that it can't or won't happen, but in our understanding of the project, in our evaluation, the amount of reliance on 140, particularly through the downtown area, is de minimis.
So so are you getting your statistics on the trip distribution from UPS?
Yes, to some degree. We actually have surveyed.
As a baseline?
We've surveyed the Hartford Avenue facility, so we have the numbers. We understand how that functions. And we know that it has a very high reliance on Route 20, de facto. So there's some evidence already that.
What a surprise.
Right. They paid for college. I worked there for 4 years, you know. I know how the place works. But, you know, it's FedEx is a different scenario, right? It's geographically located just over the Shrewsbury border. You know, those trucks go to 290 and they actually go south as well to Route 9. And I haven't quantified who's using the downtown area, but
Right.
I don't think there's a high reliance on the downtown area in Route 140 generally by this particular facility.
So you don't think that I'm not gonna come back to you 5 years from now and say, you said it wasn't gonna happen. I mean, the projection is that the traffic is gonna go east and west on 120, right?
As a practical matter, where the transportation hubs are located, it makes a lot more sense to be on 20. And I'll point out, because we've looked at the downtown area extensively, as you're aware, as part of other projects.
Yeah.
You don't want to go through the downtown if you can avoid it, right, during those hours, right? I mean, realistically,
It is a trucker's route, though.
if it has to be, and
Right.
that's the point, is that if transportation hubs are not relying or in line with the desire line to use that downtown area, it won't be used. Far more efficient on.
One last question.
Yep.
Again, it goes to why aren't different corridors looked at? In the Q&A, your response, on page 27, it was a question about separating the delivery and the trailers in a general way. And the answer was, majority of the trucks, because we were interested in what local roads are they gonna go on, not so much the trailers as delivery trucks.
Right.
obviously it's where they make deliveries, but to get from A to B, is something gonna happen. And the answer was, the majority are gonna be oriented to the Route 20 corridor. Makes sense. And it says to access Route 9, Route 140, 146, and the Mass Pike. So it did mention 140.
Yeah, and the reason is because if you look at, I'll go back to this diagram, 140 does provide connection to a substantial number of residential areas in.
Talk about the trailers.
Oh, the trailers. Oh, no.
Well, maybe that's not what it was about.
Correct.
but
That was about the package trucks.
That was the package trucks?
Yeah. Package trucks,
Well, then why would you be saying, if it's a package truck, why would you be saying going to the Mass Pike?
I think, I'd have to look at the exact wording of what the intention of that response was twofold. To identify that articulated heavy commercial vehicles would be essentially on Route 20 and major commercial routes.
Right.
Principally Route 20, principally because of its connection to the Mass Pike and the transportation hubs in Worcester, principally.
Okay.
Package trucks would be using 140, Lake Street, and other local roads to disperse to the residential concentrations that they're making deliveries to, and commercial.
Okay. I don't understand. Can you look at that? It was on page, it was comment 20, I think it was comment 27. It might have been page 27. You don't need to do it now. But if tractor trailers, if that's tractor trailers and they're going to 140, or they're going to Route 9, well, if you go Route 9 one way, it's one thing. If you go the other way towards Worcester, it's another thing.
We will clarify that.
Okay. And then I'll stop.
Okay.
And then next week I'll have 10 more questions for you. But,
They're good questions. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I get geeky about stuff. I want to know why it works the way it works.
It's not the first time I've heard questions like that. Traffic's a fascinating subject.
It's just the way I think. I'm sorry. All right. But we're not going to solve anything tonight anyways, right? Oh, I'm sorry. This is a public hearing. Our lone audience member may have a question. I forgot.
Sandra Fritz, 21 Pheasant Hill Drive. I have a question on the peer review, if I can, through you, Mr. Chair. If I understood correctly, there was a question about if supplemental roads would be impacted, and I think the answer was no, that you don't believe supplemental roads need to be looked at, that it's already, the roads, if I understand that correctly?
Yeah, through the chair.
Sure.
So we're not saying that we're not going to add traffic to additional locations. If you look, for instance, to Sunderland Road in Worcester, Waterville Street in Grafton, the Route 140 interchange, yes, we're going to add traffic there, but in such an inconsequential way that it doesn't rise to the level of requiring analysis to determine that it's minimal impact. There's a 5% rule that we apply. It's levels of service delay, how an intersection functions, generally only become an issue if you introduce 5% more or more change to volume. And at those other supplemental locations that were cited, we're well below those numbers. So we're not saying that we're not adding some traffic to them. In fact, our technical response actually shows what those volumes are and calculates the percentage change. But to analyze them wouldn't provide any useful additional information. It wouldn't show that a D goes to an E or an E goes to an F. It would be an academic exercise that could be done, but it wouldn't show a useful result or something that would trigger the need for mitigation. So that's, I just want to be clear about that. Grafton Street is a perfect example, right? That's a signalized location. It operates at level of service C or better, B or better on Route 20. And that was studied as part of the Edgemere project. It was studied and evaluated by Mass DOT It's subject to an improvement plan, which is now at the 25% design level. So yes, we're adding traffic there, but we're not changing the ability for that intersection to function well. And it's already being addressed by a project that Mass DOT is advancing. So it's a long-winded answer, but you know, those supplemental locations are not being impacted to a level that would require a lot of analysis.
Thank you. I think through the chair, for my personal perspective, I live off of Stony Hill, and we know Stony Hill has been affected by a lot of, I mean, we've been there 32 years, we've seen the incremental increases, and when we talk about traffic, the through traffic, you know, 5,000 more trips, either east or west, are going to significantly impact our neighborhood's ability. I've been working at home since COVID, and now I try to go out during the day when I think there won't be traffic. It literally can take me 5 minutes to turn right, and it's not what we're hearing as peak hours. So I think there is a lot more impact. I think we're looking at this, or the traffic study is looked at in an academic way. We're looking at what's quantitative, using empirical data, and mention of perception. I think, Mr. Powell, you mentioned it. Like, my perception is a reality of what's for our neighborhood, and safely getting in and out of Stony Hill now is sometimes almost impossible, never mind going left. And I do like the talk of mitigation for the intersection of Cherry and Centec, but lights and lane relabeling, to me, isn't enough. If you're on Centec now taking a left and going west on Route 20, that left turn lane it's so narrow now on 20. I do not understand how these articulated trucks are going to be in significant numbers coming out of Centec and taking a left on westbound onto 20, where it's already, you almost get the front end of your car with the brown trucks that come out of there today using Centec. So I just think there's a lot here, and it's a safety issue, and 5,000 more trips is, to me, significant, and it's a safety issue, and it's going to add to the neighborhood who lives over there. So when we look at that, I don't want to just keep talking about it in terms of kind of this academic. It's how is it going to affect our neighborhood and the safety of our neighbors. Thank you.
I appreciate you saying that. Actually, Stony Hill was one place in my next list I was going to ask you to look at, because I think I told you on the way in, the 40B, they knew there was a problem there. And I actually go out through this sometimes, just because. And just so you're aware, it's not UPS. UPS isn't causing the problem because it's already happening.
Right.
But I waited once 8 minutes before I could cross that street.
You're a patient man.
So, no, I'm not. And believe me, I would have jet out if I could have. I had talked to somebody about, is the focus keeping the traffic going on Route 20? That's the main focus? Not you in general, but I mean just traffic. It's keep the main arteries flowing, right?
Yeah, that's the objective of a principal arterial is to move traffic.
Right.
And that's a DOT objective, and why signals are timed the way that they are.
Right. And unfortunately, and if you get a chance, seriously, I don't know if there's anything you do, because the traffic's on Route 20. It's a long queue to get out there in rush hours, and even in non-rush hours. I don't know that there's anything that we could do or you could do, but that is one place where increased traffic that has nothing to do with you, because you guys aren't there yet, causes a real hardship for the people in there. I mean, it really does. So she has a legitimate concern. And most of the time, I tell people nobody ever believes what a traffic study says, right? The layman, they never believe it until it happens. But on that particular one, I really think, this is just an aside, I think they have a legitimate complaint there. Sure. And there's not an easy way to fix it, because MassDOT won't let them put in a light because it doesn't meet the warrant yet. Mm-hmm. And so they're in a catch-22.
Yeah, understood.
Anyways.
We've you've done a lot of projects in town, as you're aware. Everything from Lakeway Commons to Price Chopper to White City Plaza, Centec North, and I make it a point to go back after the fact and see how these actually perform. And, you know, I'm pleased to say that we've met the objectives in every case of how we wanted it to function and how we predicted it to function. And this is no exception. We want this to function as well.
Right.
As the business we're in is making sure things work and that they're safe. So we take this very seriously and we work very closely. And I love the town. I grew up here, went to school here, and I take every comment, including the last, very seriously. So we're glad to consider that in our responses.
Again, it wasn't directed specifically
Oh, no,
at you guys, but it's a problem, and people are frustrated that, you know, traffic's gonna get worse. It's not your fault. It just is, and a resident has a lot of times no recourse. So anyways, okay, we beat it dead. Continue the meeting till next month?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can I have a motion to continue the hearing?
Motion to continue the hearing to
September
September 5th.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for staying so long, but I really think it's an important discussion.
Appreciate the effort you put into it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, sorry, guys. I just thought we needed to.
It's therapy for you, isn't it?
What?
It's therapy for you, isn't it?
All right, the next order of business is to discuss and deliberate on 6 Maple Ave, site plan approval and special permit. The hearing is closed. We have a draft decision. Do you want to go over it real quick?
Yeah, so I did provide the draft decision to the board. Again, it's primarily a standard condition. This is mixed use of note in this case. I know, parking was talked about, so there is no required parking in the center of town. We are still encouraging, looking at potential for shared parking opportunities for this site. And they did provide the narrative that illustrates the parking. I did want to note from the discussion last meeting, there was some discussion of the sight lines that were
Cutting the
in
bushes.
the street. So I had, in the initial one sent to the board, I forgot to include that condition. But the version at everyone's place tonight includes that condition that the vegetation, which actually it's an invasive species tree anyway, so that be removed or otherwise, trimmed in order to
So
meet those sight lines.
the draft is the same, except you added that.
Correct.
Okay. Anybody have any questions, comments?
No question, Chair.
No?
Nope.
You want to
question.
talk about what kind of ice cream they're going to do and why they're going to use the different flavors? No?
Non-dairy.
Okay.
I would
All
ask
right.
that they please have.
Could somebody,
I'll make a motion to approve the site plan approval for 6 Maple Ave,
6 Maple Ave? Okay, decision dated,
dated August,
Or August, April.
don't you be going backwards on me,
Okay.
August
August
1st.
all right, we have a second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Prospect Street.
So Prospect Street, similarly, the public hearing was closed on this project. An additional condition was added to this one in relation to the culvert, so that was discussed at the previous meeting as well.
The culvert?
Yeah, the culvert, so that was not included in the initial design. The project design professional said that they would be willing to do that as a condition of approval, that just be provided as part of final plan set.
Okay,
So it's a very straightforward
good.
design.
Well, they're going to address it anyway, so that's good.
Yep.
Any other questions on that?
No.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the site plan approval for 65 Prospect Street.
Second.
Any further discussion? To being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so voted. Can we hold off the zoning articles, or do you just want to?
Yes, so I provided those. I don't have a formal presentation. We'll move into that for the next meeting, but this is the slate of items that we're looking at presenting for the upcoming town meeting. So just wanted to put those on people's radar. If there's anything else that the board would like to pursue, we're happy
If we're
to-
gonna, well, we should discuss it next meeting, because we're gonna start running out of time, right?
Right. Yep, correct.
So, okay, so,
When is the next town meeting?
in October,
October.
No,
right now. What? It's November? I was told that it might have changed. Originally, it was October.
sorry.
But that's okay, because November makes more sense, because we're gonna run out of time. Okay. Soon. Okay, so, is there, oh, I do have to do this. I just want to acknowledge that, we had quite a bit of correspondence come in. We had an email, July 11th from Catherine Lipson about, the Clinton Street project. Had an email come in, dated the 12th for Brian Hebert, again, about the project. We also had an email on July 12th, again, from Noreen and Sal Camarado, about the project. We had an email come in, July 14th, from High Ginsberg regarding the warehouses at 142 Clinton Street, the project. An email dated the 15th from, July 15th, from Thomas Grisso. It's, that subject matter was the Shrewsbury Planning Board. Email dated July 18th, from Karen Bonnicky, about the Planning Board meeting agenda for, August 1st. We had an email dated July 19th from Phil Simonu and Ken Engstrand about the warehouse project. We had an email on July 28th from Dan Kilpatrick and Deborah Mulliken Kilpatrick, concerns about the aquifer. We had an email on the 28th from Diane Mazakowski regarding the warehouse project. We had another email on the 28th, again from Noreen and Sal Camarado, about hours of operation for the warehouses. And the last one we had was an email dated July 29th from Scott Nolan about the warehouses. So we did read all of those, and there were responses made if they needed to be at the time they came in, right?
Yeah, we did, not on the agenda right now, but we did receive a couple of emails that I believe were forwarded to the board just today as well, so.
Okay. Well, they'll go on the next one.
Yep, I just want to make sure.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, so late, but
Motion to
Sorry.
adjourn.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
There was one other item,
Oh.
discuss and vote on delegates to CMRPC.
oh, we're gonna nominate Perna, so we're done.
Yeah.
Who was on it? Seriously,
I am on.
you stay on it?
Yeah. I
You.
can- Huh? Yeah, Dino too, right? No?
I want to know.
Was he an alternate? Was Dino the alternate and Perna was the?
Correct.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, didn't we kind of shame him into it last year, Dino?
You
Yeah.
shamed me a lot of times.
Yeah. Okay,
I'll continue. on
So
the same office.
would you like to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, and Dino, you'd be the alternate. So, would you make a motion?
I'll make a motion to nominate Perna for the CMRPC delegate, and Dino will be the alternate.
Okay, or, do we have a second?
Second.
Or Steve's not here, so we could do it to him. That's what he gets for not being here.
Put him on
He's
seat.
at home watching this going, no!
Okay, so, then if there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, so voted,
Make a motion to adjourn now.
okay.
Oh, not yet.
You want to hang out long?
Just one more thing, okay, we need a second.
Second.
Okay, second, all right.
Aye.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no, thank you. Evening, thank you for staying with us.